Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
John followed her to her rooms. Ghost walking closely beside him, she wished to speak some more to him and he to her after what she'd said in the crypts. However, when they arrived at her rooms, he found they were not alone. Sitting up at the edge of her bed, dressed in his nightclothes, was Hodor, and he was clearly agitated as he sat there shaking and trembling. Hodor, he said when he saw Nan. "Oh, my poor boy, here, drink this," Nan said, grabbing some water. "Hodor," the giant man said as he took the mug from her. Jon watched on as she comforted him. He was never really sure of their relationship, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson. To figure out which it was, you'd need to figure out just how old Nan herself was, and that was a mystery no one knew the truth of. Eventually, Hodor calmed down and looked up at Jon and smiled before saying that one word he always did. Jon, though, had for some reason always understood him well. "Hodor," he said with a smile which Jon returned. "It's good to see you too, Hodor." "Walder," Nan said. "What? His name is Walder, not Hodor. I want you to help him, Jon Snow, only you can." "Help him how?" "As you do with Ghost, you must do with Walder," Nan said, looking curiously at him. Jon looked at the woman as if she were crazy, which at times over the years he had no doubt a lot of people had probably thought she was. But there was no sign of it in her eyes as she looked back at him, far from it. Jon had never seen the woman look more alert than she did right now. She looked different to him. At first, he had put it down to his memory of her playing tricks on him, but now as he really examined her, she looked almost younger. "I can't do that with a person," Jon said. "Who says you can't? You have a gift given to you by the old gods themselves. You think they put limits on their gifts, Jon Snow? I don't. I mean, but a person. It is no different than a wolf, or you have learned nothing when you run through the woods as Ghost. You can do this, Jon. I've been waiting since the day your uncle left for the Vale for you to come and help my boy." Despite his reluctance to believe what the woman was saying, despite his own disbelief that this was even possible, and despite the thoughts of the wrongness of what he was about to do, Jon felt Ghost come beside him. As he ran his hand through the wolf's fur, he realized that he'd already decided to help. He looked at Hodor/Walder and could see something he had never noticed before: pain. There was pain in his eyes, and Jon felt ashamed. He'd never thought the man capable of such a thing. "I'll try. Do or do not, there is no try," Nan said. Jon nodded and reached out to Walder, who was clearly just as nervous as he was. He looked to Ghost, who walked over, and Jon took Walder's hand and placed it on the wolf's head, watching as he stroked the fur, looking happy as he did. When he saw him calm down, Jon walked over, grabbed a chair and placed it in front of the bed. Sitting down, he closed his eyes and reached out to form the connection. He immediately found Ghost, but that was all he could see in the room, so he moved further away, rising from the room out into the keep, and then outside the keep itself before he could get his bearings. He was in a raven, so he flew over the broken tower, over the bell tower, and into the godswood. The heart tree was standing out like a beacon, with everything else around it paling into insignificance, so he flew toward it and landed in its branches. Above him, on a different branch, stood another raven, and as he looked at it, he saw it had 3 eyes. He cawed loudly at it, and it stood still before he took off and flew toward it, forcing it to fly off. He chased after it, flying back over the towers, over the courtyard, and out of the grounds of Winterfell. Cawing at it as it flew off to the north, he flew back in and looked down on the castle and saw Ghost beside a larger, brighter figure. So he flew closer, and the light grew stronger until suddenly it was gone, and he was in a cave full of roots and tunnels. He was no longer a raven, though, and as he reached out, he saw he had arms, hands. He was a man. He touched the side of the tunnels and began to walk. As he did, he heard sobbing coming from far ahead of him. Running, the sobbing grew louder and louder. He eventually came to a dead end. In front of him stood a closed door, and he walked to it before pushing it open. Sitting on the ground on the other side, he found a crying boy. Though boy was a loose term, the child was at least twice his own size. He looked at the boy and reached out to touch him, feeling the need to wipe his tears away. "Help me," the boy said. "I will." "I don't want to. Don't let them make me." "Make you? I don't want to." "What don't you want to do?" I don't want to hold the door, don't let them make me do this, the boy said and looked up at him. Walder, Jon said, recognizing some of his features. Are you the White Wolf? How did you know? She told me about you, the White Wolf, that you'd come for me if I was ever scared, but you never did, Walder said, crying more now. I'm sorry, I'm here now, come with me, I'll take you home. I can't, they won't let me, I have to hold the door. No you don't. I do, as long as the door is there, I'll have to hold it. Jon felt his eyes close and reached out to hold Walder's hand. He could feel her in the distance, flying toward him. Her speed was far greater than it had ever been before. Step back, he said to Walder as he closed the door and moved them both to one side. She landed in front of them, and he looked at her purple eyes and then to the door. Dracarys, he said as the flames burned the door away to nothing but ash. Walder, it's time to go home, he said as he led the boy to climb onto the back of the dragon. So've gone, he said as the white dragon unfurled her blue wings and took to the air. Waking up the next morning, Jon was certain he'd had the oddest dream the night before. His head throbbed terribly, though, and as he stood up he almost keeled over. He staggered to his table and quickly swallowed some water. He washed himself before quickly dressing and looked around to see Ghost lying on the floor, looking at him, nodding to the wolf. They left the room. He really needed to break his fast. As he entered the hall, he found it was either really early or really late, and he wasn't sure which. There was food available though, so he sat down, and after feeding Ghost, he looked up to see his sisters arrive. Jon, are you feeling well? Sansa said worriedly. What? Oh, I'm fine. Why, your nose, Jon, it's bleeding, his sister said, and Jon looked down to see his tunic was covered in drops of blood. It's nothing to worry about, little sister. It happens sometimes, Jon said as reassuringly as he could while taking the offered handkerchief from Sansa. Will you make my bow today? Arya said while biting into a sausage. Arya, can't you see he's hurt? Sansa said, shaking her head. He said he was fine, aren't you? Arya said, looking at him with concern before he ruffled her hair and smiled at her. I'm fine, little wolf. Jon looked up then as Walder entered the hall, grabbing a meal and moving to a table at the back. He couldn't let him go though. He needed to know if he had only been dreaming last night. Walder, come sit with us, he shouted to looks of confusion from Sansa and Arya and some of the others in the hall. Who's Walder? Arya asked as the man in question moved toward them. Jon, that's Hodor, silly. Sansa giggled. Good morning, Jon, Walder said as he sat down, both his sisters looking at the man in shock while Jon smiled at the realization that last night had actually happened. Sansa, after breaking her fast and eventually getting over the shock that Hodor was actually called Walder, and far from being the simpleton everyone thought he was, instead the man was actually quite sweet and clever. Sansa had insisted Jon be checked out by the Maester, and she and Arya had gone to their lessons with the Septa. She had hoped Lady Mira would join her, the girl having seemingly recovered from her illness, but she had told her and Arya that she was from the North and the North didn't suffer Septas. Arya had laughed loudly at that and said that since she was from the North, she shouldn't have to suffer Septas either, but Sansa had insisted she come to her lesson with her. The truth, though, was that neither of them wished to be having lessons today. Spending time with her brother and his friend yesterday had been the most fun she'd had since she could ever remember. Both Jon and Loras had not only been chivalrous and kind, but they both seemed to enjoy spending time with her and Arya, something Robb never did. Lady Sansa, what are you sewing? Septa Mordane asked, and Sansa stopped her daydreaming to answer. A handkerchief for my brother Jon, Sansa said, looking down at the fabric she'd picked to design a white wolf on for her brother. You shouldn't make things for that boy, Lady Sansa, the Septa said, shaking her head disapprovingly at her. That boy, as you call him, is my brother Jon, and I'll make him whatever I chose, Septa, Sansa said loudly and ignored the giggle from Arya beside her. He's your half-brother, Lady Sansa. He really looks like a full brother to me, Arya said, and this time it was Sansa who giggled. Lady Arya, the Septa said, annoyed. Both girls couldn't help but laugh, and the Septa stormed from the room, leaving them to their own devices, which meant that within seconds Arya was up and heading for the door. Sansa was surprised, though, when her sister looked back at her. Coming? Arya asked, and Sansa couldn't help but follow. They made their way to the training yard and saw Theon and Robb sparring, both boys showing off as they did so. Soon they were joined by Jojen and Mira, and Sansa welcomed the chance to speak to them. Lady Mira, Lord Jojen, she said politely. It's just Mira, Lady Sansa. I'm Arya, her sister said, looking at the spear Mira was spinning in her hands. Are Jon and Loras not with you? Jojen asked. Jon was bleeding from the nose earlier, so he went to see Maester Luwin. I haven't seen Lord Loras yet, Sansa said. Here they are now, Arya said, running to them and being caught and spun by her brother as he and Loras walked towards them. Lady Sansa, Loras said as he reached them first, since Jon was still spinning Arya, though it was slower now. Lord Loras, Sansa said softly. Jon, how are you feeling? She added when Jon and Arya stopped playing with each other. I'm good, little sister, I told you nothing to worry about. Mira, are you feeling better? Jon asked. So good, I came for a spar. I believe you owe me one, Mira said cheekily, and Arya looked at her in disbelief. Your spar, Arya said. Mira is really good too, Loras said with a nod which Mira returned. So Jon, you ready? But only if you promise to go easy on me. Jon said with a smile as Mira shook her head. What's that, asking a girl to go easy on you, Snow? I thought you competed in tournaments. The loud voice of her other brother shouted from where he and Theon had been listening. How many tournaments have you competed in, Lord Robb? Oh yeah. That's right, none, isn't it? Loras said to giggles. Yes, but if they're easy enough for Snow to win, then Robb would have won more than 2. Theon said laughing. So what do you say, Snow, feel up to a spar? Robb asked. She shook her head at Jon as she didn't want to see them fight. Robb, though, just smirked as Jon walked over to her. When he whispered in her ear, don't worry, little sister, I have no intention of fighting with him, she smiled back at him in relief. Not today, Robb, Jon said to his brother. See, it's true what they say, Robb. Bastards are cowardly by nature. Theon said, and both he and her brother started laughing, as opposed to the Ironborn whose bravery is known throughout the realm. Sansa said sarcastically, and apart from Theon and Robb, everyone laughed. Why, you little bitch, Theon said, taking a step forward threateningly. Sansa hadn't seen anyone move as quickly as Jon did right then. Loras moved in front of her, so she didn't quite see what happened, but when she looked, Theon was on the ground and Jon was moving back toward them, grabbing his tourney sword from Arya, who had picked it up. Fine, you want a spar, I'll give you a spar. Which of you comes first? Jon said angrily. Jon, please, Sansa said, and Loras leaned down to whisper to her. Let him do this, Sansa. So she looked to her brother and nodded. What's that about your bravery? I said which of you comes first, Jon said, pacing quickly. After that, Theon stood up and stormed over to grab a tourney sword, and Sansa looked on as more people arrived. She saw Lord Jaime arrive with some guards and looked up to the walkway to see her father looking down as her mother joined him. Enough, her father shouted. No, Jon shouted back up. They wanted a spar, so let them have one, or is it an honor? Just a word here, Lord Stark. Sansa looked on in shock. No one had spoken to her father that way. She saw her mother say something to her father and then saw him nod before looking down. Fine, but this will be done properly, Sir Roderick. Prepare them correctly. She looked on as the old knight took Robb and Theon to one side and Jon walked toward her, his anger almost completely gone now. I'm sorry, little sister, he insulted you. I won't have it, Jon said. I don't want anyone hurt over me, she said softly. I won't hurt them, Sansa. But they need to be taught a lesson, both of them. Robb shouldn't allow him to speak like that about you either. He leaned in and hugged her and she felt almost on the verge of tears as he held her. He seemed to sense it though and didn't let her go for a few moments. When he did, he smiled at her and she felt a little better. It took Sir Roderick a few more minutes, and when he returned with Robb and Theon, they were wearing helms and some protective padding on their chests. The knight walked over to Jon and bid him do the same, but he just shook his head. Sir Roderick then looked to his father, who nodded, while his mother stood beside him with a look she couldn't place. Fine, as you wish, Snow. Theon, you're up first, Roderick said. She watched as Theon stood waiting for Jon and looked around to see Lord Jaime smirking while looking up at her father, and Mira and Arya petting Ghost while watching on eagerly. Jojen looked on with an almost bored expression while Loras stood there gripping his own tourney sword in his hands. When Jon stood facing Theon, she almost winced when she saw how much bigger he was than her brother. He was at least a head taller, and though slim, he was certainly heavier. This won't last long, Loras said, and she frowned, her forehead creased in worry. He won't hurt Jon, will he? She asked, and Loras laughed. Sansa, he won't even see him, he said, and she looked over at them when Sir Roderick gave the signal. Theon swung heavily, and then it seemed like everything slowed down for her. She saw the sword come towards Jon's head, and she couldn't see how he couldn't be hit, and then he wasn't there. Instead, he was behind Theon, and she heard the sword hit against his back, and a moment later Theon was on the ground. She looked around and saw the amazement on some of the faces. Jory Castle was laughing as he watched the spar. "Yield," she heard Jon say, and as she looked back she saw him kneeling on Theon's chest with his sword placed against his neck. "Yield," Jon said louder now. "No," Theon coughed as Jon moved his knee. "It's done, Snow, you won," Roderick said as Robb looked on nervously. Jon got up off Theon and moved back, waiting for Robb to step forward. She looked up at her father to see him looking both proud and nervous. Her mother was speaking agitatedly to him as he shook his head. Eventually, Robb held his sword and moved to face Jon, though this time it wasn't quick. Jon instead just avoided Robb's swings, and every so often he would line his sword up to where it would be a certain hit, but he would not follow through on any of them. She watched as he gracefully moved out of the way when Robb swung to the left, his sword missing while Jon's was pointed at his neck. As he ducked when Robb aimed for his head while Jon's sword ended up pointed at his chest. Jon was performing a dance while Robb was struggling to swing his sword. Not once did Robb manage to come close to hitting Jon, and not once did Jon attempt to follow through and hit Robb. "Why doesn't he finish it?" Arya said, and Mira laughed. "It was over before it started," Jojen said, and Sansa couldn't help but agree. But Jon still didn't finish. Not once did he hit Robb. The end came when her other brother fell to his knees, exhausted, and she looked on as Jon held his sword to Robb's neck, just barely touching his skin. "Yield?" Jon asked. I yield," Robb said breathlessly. Jon nodded and offered his hand to Robb to help him up, and she was surprised to see him accept it, though she was happy her two brothers hadn't hurt each other. When it was done and the crowd started to walk away from the yard, Mira stepped forward. "You still owe me a spar, you know," Mira said, and Sansa joined the others as they laughed. "I do indeed, shall we?" Jon said. "Jon, may I speak with you?" She heard her father's voice from the walkway. "Of course, my lord, perhaps we could go to the Godswood," Jon asked, frowning. I'll see you there in a few moments," her father answered, and she noticed that her mother was no longer beside him. "It seems we must wait another day, Mira," Jon said with a smirk. "I'm beginning to think you fear me, Jon Snow," Mira said, and Arya laughed. "Of course I do, I've seen you fight, remember?" Jon said and turned to walk away, following Ghost even though she hadn't heard him call the wolf. Ned watching Jon spar was a shock. Jaime hadn't been lying. Ned hadn't seen such a natural swordsman since Sir Arthur Dayne. Watching him dismantle Theon had been one thing, but how he'd shown Robb up was another. Kat had been beyond furious and had stormed past him with a thunderous look on her face. He was glad at least to see his boys shake hands at the end, but for the life of him, he couldn't understand what had gotten into Jon to make him want to fight his brother that way. When he had arrived, something had clearly just occurred. Had someone insulted Jon, made a comment about his birth, his mother? Whatever it was, they'd clearly enraged the boy. And yet he was calm when he called up to him and called him out for honor. What did he mean by that? Did this have something to do with King's Landing? Wasn't honor questioned there too? He needed to speak to him and was pleased Jon had chosen to do so in the Godswood. He had hoped his boys still stuck to their gods, hoped that he still kept to the old way. Going south had changed Jon in many ways. He was more confident and carried himself differently, but he hoped more than anything that the boy he raised was still there somewhere. Seeing him adhere to the old gods, he knew that he was, and so he walked to the Godswood to speak to his son. Arriving there, he smiled at the sight. Jon was knelt down on one knee, his hand resting on the tree. Ned stood still for a moment and waited until he'd finished his prayer before moving toward him. He could see the white wolf looking at him warily, and when Jon turned around he thought for the briefest moment his eyes were a different color, but when he blinked, he could see the familiar gray. "Lord Stark," Jon said, and he felt his heart tighten. It had been one thing yesterday to speak so formally, but here in this sacred place there was no need for it. "You can call me father when we're alone, Jon," he said, smiling. "Why would I do that, uncle?" Jon said. Ned felt his world spin out of his control. He knew Jon knew. How was it Jaime, or had it been Howland? He had arrived with his children. Had his old friend gone against the oath he'd sworn? No, it seemed unlikely. It was the Lannister, he should have guessed. He had been a fool to think the fallen knight would be content with waiting until Jon was older, until the danger to him had passed. Ned stumbled through his words. What's wrong, Uncle? Cat got your tongue, Jon said. Why did Lannister tell you? Ned said, why? Because it's my right to know who I am, isn't it? It's my right to know who my mother was, who my father was, but then again, why would you care about my rights? Jon said angrily. I've always cared for you, Jon, Ned said. Have you cared for me or more about your friend who sits on my throne? Robert won. Robert stole gods. Even now here in this sacred place, you'd still pick him over me if given the choice. Jon, no, Uncle, not now, not yet. Pray to the gods for guidance, Uncle, you'll need it. What do you mean? Ned asked. We'll talk later when I'm calmer, but right now you have bigger worries than I do. I don't understand, Ned said. No, you really don't. I've been here a day and I can understand it better than you. Gods, she was right. The wolves really have left this place. She was right. Who? What are you talking about, Jon? What wolves? Ned wasn't just confused, now he was completely lost. This wasn't the conversation he expected to have. Your son is a fucking disappointment. Do you have any idea what people think of Robb? Jon said loudly. Robb, what about my son? Ned said, anger rising in his own voice. You've allowed him to become arrogant, cocky. He spends all his time with an Ironborn, a fucking Ironborn, here in the heart of the North. Do you want to know? Do you even care what that spar was about, Uncle? What? That fucking squid hostage called my sister a bitch and made a move to actually strike her, and your son stood by and did nothing, not a damn thing. Yesterday he practically threw the gift I'd brought him back in my face, and since I've been here they've both spent their time sniggering and laughing at me while disrespecting Loras, Mira, and Jojen. I didn't know, Ned said, shaking his head. That's the problem, Uncle, Jon said as he began to move away. What happened in King's Landing? Didn't your wife already tell you? I'm sure her brother has sent her ravens by now. Tell me. Ned said determinedly, your good brother got drunk and took it upon himself to insult my mother, your sister. He called her a whore, said my father must have found her in a brothel. When I spoke back to him, he tried to hit me not once but twice, falling on his arse each time. I left it at that. But then he decided to insult Jaime and my mother again before demanding that I apologize, so I told him some truths which he did. Not like and I left. What truths? Ned asked, worried about the reply. About his house and their actions, Jon said, shaking his head. What happened next? How did you end up jousting him? Oh, that part was... down to both your good brother and foster father and the fact that I didn't wish to allow them to maim me for hurt pride and to make a damn point. Wait, what maim? What did he mean by maim and what was Jon Arryn's part in this? He hadn't heard any of this. What happened, Jon? He asked. They held a trial. Edmure lied and Jon Arryn backed him up. Originally they tried to do it without the king noticing, but surprisingly for some reason Robert was sober enough to attend. So they couldn't just sentence me without evidence. In the end, despite the fact I had done nothing wrong, they demanded I apologize. I mean, I'm a bastard after all, right? Jon said accusingly. Ned stuttered, don't say it. Jon said, lowering his head before looking back at him. Anyway, I refused when Edmure wouldn't apologize for what he said about my mother and father. So I asked for an honorable duel with the loser to apologize. And despite you no doubt hearing me, I somehow tricked your good brother as bastards aren't supposed to. I beat him and guess what, Uncle? Why, it seems Trueborns don't hold to their honor either, as Edmure refused to apologize to me, though I did eventually get him to apologize to my mother and father. Now, if that's all, Uncle, Jon, we need to speak. Aye, we do, but you need to think, Uncle, about quite a lot of things. We'll meet tomorrow. Ned watched as his nephew walked away, the direwolf walking beside him, his mind full of the revelations he'd just been hit with. Had he failed his family even more than he'd thought? If what Jon said was true, he hadn't had his son standing up for his sister. His ward, no damn it, he was a hostage. Jon was right about that. Had he been blind to it all? He would need to speak with his children and see what was going on in his home. The wolves had left. What did she mean? Who was she? Lyanna was. He speaking of his sister? What had happened in King's Landing? If what Jon was saying was the truth, not only had Edmure not told the full story, but Jon Arryn had never sent him a raven telling him anything either. They had tried to deceive him. Could that be true? Surely Jon Arryn wouldn't condone such a thing. Could Jon be lying? He was angry at him. Could he have made it up? No, he wouldn't. Would he? Ned needed to speak to those who were there with him. Lady Dacey, the small Jon. They'd be here soon for the wedding. He would talk to them then. As for the rest, he didn't even know where to begin. Jon knew. He knew the truth. Was he staking his claim? It seemed so. What was he to do? The brother he chose or the boy that was his blood? He knelt down and reached his hand against the tree and began to pray, hoping his gods could guide him. Jaime, he waited for Jon outside the gates to the godswood. Loras had moved to join him, but he nodded for him to stay with Jon's sisters. So he stood alone, though Jors and Allers were standing a little ways off, as he had instructed them to guard Jon more discreetly until he had spoken to Ned Stark. He had arrived in the yard just in time to see Jon demand to spar with his brother and the squid. When he'd seen how angry Jon was, he feared for them both, but Jon instead put on a display of quiet rage. He had dismantled the squid in the blink of an eye. What he did to his brother, though, was far worse. He embarrassed the boy, showing him just how far below him he really was in terms of skill. It actually reminded Jaime a little of himself. Years earlier, someone had called his brother a demon monkey while he was in the sparring yard. Jaime had been infuriated and had proceeded to give the boy a lesson he'd never forget. What he'd seen Jon do here was pretty much the same thing, so he knew just how angry he had been. He just needed to know the source of that anger. When Ned called to speak to Jon, he had hoped he'd deny him the opportunity and that he could speak to him first, but Jon had come here to this godswood and his uncle had followed, and so he had waited. He breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of Jon and Ghost as they walked toward the gate. Jon didn't look angry or agitated, and more importantly, he could sense no sadness in his king's features. "Are you all right?" But I need a ride. Care to join me?" "Sure, why not? I'm sure Honor would enjoy a run out. I'm not racing you, though." Jaime gasped and was pleased at the laugh he got in return. "No, we wouldn't want to do that again, would we? Besides, one bear attack is more than enough for one trip." Jaime smirked as he and Jon walked to the stables. When Loras saw them, he came over, telling Jon's sisters to wait, though neither listened. So they, along with Mira and Jojen, walked over to speak with them. "Everything all right?" Loras asked, looking at Jon and then Jaime. Lord Jaime and I were going for a ride. You coming?" Jon asked and Loras nodded. "Can I come?" Arya asked. "Not this time, little wolf, perhaps another." Jon said, smiling at her before looking at Mira when he saw the frown on his sister's face. "Arya, why don't you come with me and I'll show you how to use a spear?" Mira said, and Arya's frown was soon replaced with vigorous nodding. "Are you sure you're all right, Jon?" Sansa asked softly. I'm good, little sister. I'll be back in a little bit. Is there anything you'd like to do when I return?" I don't know. Could you teach me how to draw?" she asked, looking at him doubtfully. If that's what you want," Jon said, and Sansa gave him a full smile after saying goodbye to the girls and to Jojen, who wasn't the best horseman and so had declined the offer to join them. They made their way to the stables and readied their horses. After speaking with the stable master and after Jon had spoken quietly with the giant boy who seemed to help out everywhere, they saddled up and set off. As they passed Ned Stark on their way out the gate, the man looked at them first with a hint of worry before Jon told him they were just heading off for a short ride. He asked to give him time to ready some guards, but they had more than enough. So he reluctantly let them be. Wintertown was a small village, and Jaime found the place depressing, something that Jon also did, giving the looks he was given of the buildings and the main square, shaking his head over and over at something which displeased him. "What are you thinking, Jon?" he asked. "This town, look at it. It's like no one's done anything to it in years. It's just been left like this. It wouldn't even take much." Jon said, and he couldn't help but agree. "Why don't they do more with it?" Loras asked. "It's only ever full during the winters, so the rest of the time it's not worth it," is the thinking. "But if it were better maintained, if there had been some work done." Jon sighed. As they rode through the town, people looked on curiously. Jon was riding Winter almost casually while matching him stride by stride was Ghost. It must look an imposing sight to those not on horseback, Jaime thought. Until he'd come north, he had no idea how dire wolves were seen here. At the Rock, Ghost was almost part of the furniture. He'd been there since he was a pup, and despite how huge he was, people still in some ways saw him as one. In Lannisport, the sight of Jon and Ghost was as familiar now as that of the Pinnacle ships, and so no one paid them much mind. But here in the north, in the home of the wolf, dire wolves were mythical creatures, and to see one tamely walk beside a Stark meant more. It was a symbol, a living, breathing representation of their sigil, and Jon was the first to have one in generations. Jaime couldn't help but smirk at the thoughts of the other symbol Jon may soon have. If the wolf was impressive, what would people think of a dragon? It didn't take them long to leave the town behind, and when they did, Jon agreed and they set off at peace. The open fields soon gave way to the darkness of the woods in front of them, and Jaime watched on as Ghost looked up at Jon before he raced ahead of them. Even Winter wasn't able to keep up with the wolf in full flight. They slowed down when entering the woods, and he watched as Jon took them along a slightly overgrown path before they came to a small little pond and dismounted. Jon agreed to him to follow, and he bid the guards to stay while he and Loras walked to a set of rocks set up as seats and sat down. "I told my uncle that I know," Jon said as he sat down. "What did he say?" Jaime asked eagerly. "We didn't really discuss it more. I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Besides, he needs to get his own house in order first." "What do you mean?" Loras asked. "You saw it today, Loras, how the squid behaves. How he strolls around here like he owns the place. If you were one of my uncle's bannermen, how would you take that? As for Robb, all the time we've been north, I've wanted news of my brother, and every time people would change the subject. It wasn't until we got here ourselves that I could see why. But despite how he acts, despite the squid, it's the, how could you not stand up for your sister?" Jon said sadly. "I don't know, Jon," Loras said. "If it was Margaery and it was me, what would you have done if I'd said that about her?" Jon asked. "You wouldn't, Jon. You're nothing like him," Loras said. But if I did, then I'd knock you on your damn arse," Loras said, and Jon laughed while nodding in agreement. So that was what had happened. The Ironborn had said or done something to Jon's sister, and Robb had just stood there. No wonder he'd been so angry. But this was now the second time he'd let his anger get the better of him. He had done it with the Umbers, and now with his brother and the Ironborn. This wasn't good. Jon wasn't an angry boy, and should he not be able to control this, it could lead to problems later. "Jon, you shouldn't let yourself get so worked up," Jaime said. I know, it's just." "It's what, Jon?" Rhaenys, Jon said under his breath. "What about her?" Jaime asked. "I wasn't there for her. I should have been there for her, but I wasn't. I won't, not for anyone else. I won't allow it," Jon said. And Jaime stood up and walked over to him before sitting down beside him. "Jon, but he couldn't find the words. His own guilt over Jon's sister stopped him, so instead he placed his arm around Jon's shoulder and let him lean in against him. He could feel him trying to control his emotions, and after a while it seemed he had. "I told my uncle about King's Landing. He didn't seem to know about the trial," Jon said, his voice showing his doubt. "I'm not surprised," Jaime said, and Jon looked at him. "My lord, well, I doubt the Trout told him, and no way did Jon Arryn." "Why wouldn't Jon Arryn tell him?" Loras asked. "What would he have told him? Not the truth, so then he'd have needed to lie, but there were witnesses, people saw what happened, so the truth could have gotten back to Jon's uncle. There's no way Jon Arryn is that foolish, so instead he just said nothing and hoped the news wouldn't reach him," Jaime said, and he could see Jon nod. "Do you think your uncle will back your claim?" Loras asked. "I don't know, Loras. Frankly, I don't care," Jon said, though both he and Loras could tell he was lying. "Why though? If he backs you, then you'll have two of the kingdoms behind you, and that's without those loyal to your family," Loras asked, and Jaime hid his smirk. Little did Loras know that by the time Jon made his claim, he'd have far more support than that. "I mean, of course I want him to back me, Loras. I want the North to back me, but at this point I just don't care. He either does or he doesn't. There's an old Stark saying, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. So he'll support you then," Loras said, smiling. "He will if he's a wolf, Loras, but it won't matter if he doesn't." "Why's that?" Loras asked. "Because I'm not a lone wolf, I'm a dragon." Jon said and smiled. Jon, the ride back to Winterfell was disturbed first by Ghost, who had taken out another deer and was lazing around, not wishing to go back just yet, and then by the rain, which forced them to seek shelter in a nearby cave. Eventually, though, it stopped raining, and Ghost, who had refused to come into the cave for shelter, looked miserable as he strolled beside them with his fur sodden. After arriving back and stabilizing the horses, Jon brought Ghost to his room and lit the fire. Allowing the wolf to lie down in front of it and get himself warm and dry, it had turned out that Sansa and Arya had skipped their lessons earlier to go to the yard and were now being made to repeat them. Loras had his own duties to take care of, and the Reeds had received some ravens from their father, so they were busy with that. Jon had briefly seen Theon and Robb, who gave him very different looks. Theon's was a combination of his usual smug expression with a dose of anger, while Robb's seemed more subdued. So he had ended up sitting alone in his room thinking about what to do and not coming up with anything when there was a knock on his door, which he answered to find Walder standing there. "Jon, my grandmother wishes to speak to you." "All right, how are you feeling?" "I'm different. People, the way they look at me. The way they speak to me." "Thank you, Jon," Walder smiled. "It was your grandmother's idea," Jon said and nodded to Walder. As he locked the door, he made his way to Nan's rooms, passing Luwin on the way. The Maester had asked for a moment of his time when he was ready, as he wished to speak about some ideas he had, but as Jon had been recovering from the nosebleed, they'd put it off for now. He told the man they'd speak soon, and when asked about the wind wheels, Jon had promised to draw up some of the original plans he'd made for them. He had never expected to be so short of time there. Yes, he knew he'd speak to his uncle, and he, of course, wished for nothing more than to spend time with his brothers and sisters, but he hoped he'd find more moments to just relax. "Are you not coming in?" he said to Walder when they reached Nan's room. "No, I have work to do." "I'll see you later, Jon," Walder said. Walking away, Jon knocked at the door and waited until he was invited to enter. He could barely remember the room from the night before, and as he looked around, he found it almost odd compared to the other rooms in Winterfell. It was bright, very bright, though the windows were no bigger than any of the others he'd seen. It was colder than most of the rooms, including his own, and the furniture was even older than the furniture in the broken tower. Nan was sitting by the fire, which though lit wasn't giving off much heat, and she beckoned him over to join her. "My mother was a loyal servant of the old gods, Jon Snow," Nan said before Jon had even made it halfway across the room. "I didn't know that, Nan," Jon said, sitting down. "No one did, Jon Snow, for in all my years I've not told this story once, and I've told many a tale, as you remember." Nan laughed before continuing to speak. "Many years ago, my mother received a vision while kneeling at the heart tree. She would not wed, but would give birth to 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and each would have a part to play, though they didn't tell her what parts they were. A powerful man my father was, and my mother fell deeply for him, though like all powerful men, he had his faults, which is a story for another time. When I was born, I barely knew my brother and sister. They were older, you see. By the time I was a girl and had grown up, I didn't know what my life would be. Then the gods who spoke to my mother spoke to me too, and so it was here I was sent, and here I've waited for more years than you could even count." "Waited? I for you, Jon Snow, the White Wolf, the Winter Dragon, the prince that was promised," Nan said, smiling at him. "I don't understand," Jon said, shaking his head. "There are things we are not meant to understand until we do. I didn't understand why my boy was taken from me so young. Why he was left trapped in his body while they tortured his mind. But I knew you would come, and so I held true to my faith, and the gods rewarded me." She smiled. "Who tortured him? Was that what he meant in the cave?" I suppose it is, for I know not what he told you, only that they hurt my boy. You saw it last night, didn't you? You saw it in his eyes. I saw a boy in pain. Indeed, and you set him free." She reached out her hand and took his. "I am old Jon Snow, and my time is near an end. So ask that you wish to ask, and when we next meet, I'll show you why I've been waiting for you all these years." Jon's mind raced with everything Nan had said. This story was just like the many tales she told each of them as children. Tales of the last hero and the Night King, the Rat's Cook and the Ice Dragon. He and Robb would huddle together while the oldest person they knew spun her tales. but in all that time he'd never once heard her speak with such conviction. Such honesty. This tale she told wasn't like the others, or perhaps she simply believed it more. Despite wishing to know even more to find out exactly what she meant, Jon's mind went to only one place, one story, one tale. "Tell me of my mother," Jon said, and Nan smiled as she began to speak. "Your mother was unlike anyone I've ever met before other than my own. She was strong and full of passion, could be willful and stubborn, but had the kindest heart I've ever known. No doubt you've heard tell of her skill on a horse, something it seems you inherited, Jon Snow. But it wasn't just horses. Your mother had an affinity for all animals, large and small, fierce and meek, it mattered not. She stood up for those weaker than herself, would scratch and claw those who wronged her, but would stand in front of a charging bear for those she cared about. Your mother was a she-wolf, Jon Snow, and like all wolves, she protected the pack first and foremost. She stood up to her father when he bullied young Ben, called out those who disrespected Ned for his quiet nature, and stood toe-to-toe with Brandon against your grandfather when he refused them leave to live their lives for love despite her own feelings. She tried to go along with her father's wishes. She knew how much Ned cared for the stag, but she could never be tamed, and certainly not by a man who couldn't control his own selfish instincts. Wolves love Jon Snow fiercely, and they love true. They also love, but once and for all, for you, mother, as for your uncle Brandon, they would not be forced to go against their nature, and so the realm heard their howls. You liked her, my mother, Jon said, wiping his tear-filled eyes. No, Jon Snow, I loved your mother. Now go, the time grows late and I grow weary. We shall speak again, Jon Snow, for there is much you must know before I go to meet my mother once again. Nan said, and Jon got up from the chair. As he walked to the door and got ready to leave, Nan called out to him and he turned back to see her smile. Just for a second in the light he saw the woman she had been. Her hair was long and dark, her eyes sparkled, and her skin was smooth and unblemished. When she saw him she smiled before the woman faded away and she was old Nan once more. I thank you for my boy Jon Snow. I had feared he was lost to him forever, but your white dragon was far truer than his. He didn't know what to make of her words and they stuck with him as he walked back to his room. When he arrived, he found his sister waiting outside and the look she gave him was comical as she tried to portray fierceness. I did not expect you here, little wolf. Where were you? Arya said. I was talking to a friend. Why's your door locked? To stop little wolves playing in places they shouldn't, Jon said as he reached over to muss her hair, getting a giggle from her in return. Are you going to get me my bow now? Arya said, and Jon couldn't stop his chuckle as she looked up at him, her eyes wide. Would you wait until morning? No, she said, shaking her head, and Jon laughed loudly. Well, then it seems we must go see the smith, shall we? He said, sticking his hand out for her to hold. Really, you're doing it? Arya looked at him questioningly. I said I would, didn't I? Thank you, thank you, thank you, she said, throwing her arms around him. They met Loras and eventually Sansa on the walk to see Mikken. Sansa couldn't believe Jon was actually getting her sister a bow, and Loras just laughed at the image, which Arya did not take well, as Loras's pained shin was testament to that. Arya, you can't go around kicking lords in the shin. Why not? He was being stupid. Arya, Sansa said loudly. Nah, she's right, Sansa. Loras is stupid, Jon said, and Arya nodded in agreement. Sansa looked ready to say something when Jon winked at her and she nodded, realizing the gap. I suppose he is, Sansa said mockingly. Oh, you hurt me, you all hurt me so. Loras's overly exaggerated tone made them all laugh. Told ya, Arya said, making them laugh even more. Mikken, it seemed, needed to be convinced they had Lord Stark's permission to fit his youngest daughter with a bow. Jon did, however, get him to take measurements from Arya, which at least stopped her from getting annoyed. Once they were done, they headed back to the keep and went to their rooms to get ready for dinner. Meeting up later with Loras, they entered the great hall to find everyone in a very subdued mood. At the high table, his uncle seemed lost in thought, while beside him, Lady Catelyn was paying more attention to her son than to anyone else. Robb and Theon barely spoke, and as he sat down, he could see Arya and Sansa were uncomfortable. He didn't know whether to jape or be serious, such was the tension in the hall. Surprisingly, the tension ended up being relieved by the unlikeliest of sources as Walder stood up and began to sing. These rivers run too deep with schemes of men for days that lay ahead. They sell their souls so cheap they breed mistrust, and fill my heart with dread. When did the boy become a man and lose his life to learn so much confusion to this plan? These times are not changing. Show me the love to keep us together. Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. This boy has learned to fail in times like these. To cry seems so absurd. His own life's crisis pales in the shadow of this truly dying world. These are the games we played, so cruel, our hands raised in despair with no exception to the rule. These times are not changing. Show me the love to keep us together. Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. Where is the love to keep us together? Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. Jon looked around the hall to see faces looking on in amazement. Sansa was smiling broadly while Arya just looked confused. He saw Walder look to him and nod before taking his seat, and so he stood up and began to clap. Soon everyone else did. And Walder looked embarrassed by the attention, though it was Jaime's face which stood out the most. He was sitting there with an expression of pure shock, not caring who saw him or what anyone would say. Jon got up and walked over to make sure Jaime was all right, but before he got there, Jaime had also left his seat and made his way from the hall. When Loras saw this, he too got up and joined Jon as they both went outside looking for their lord. It took them a while, but eventually they found him near the sparring dummies. And Jon couldn't help but smile at the coincidence. A little over 4 years earlier, he had been standing in the same place doing exactly what Jaime was doing now, hitting a dummy powerfully but with absolutely no technique. "Keep your chin up, boy," Jon said, repeating the first words that Jaime Lannister had ever spoken to him. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean any offense," Jaime said, and both he and Jon laughed while Loras stood there confused. "The day we met, I was doing the same thing. That's what Lord Jaime said to me and what I replied," Jon said, and Loras laughed. "My lord, is everything all right?" Jon asked. Jon, that song, I've heard it before," Jaime said shakily. "Oh, isn't it sung regularly somewhere?" Jon said as Loras shook his head. "No, it's not. I've only ever heard it sung by the man who wrote it," Jaime said, his voice cracking. "Who wrote it, my lord?" Jon said, his own voice shaky now as he looked into Jaime's eyes. "Rhaegar Targaryen," Jaime said as Jon looked at him incredulously. "Winterfell 293 AC. Jon, sitting in his room, he tried reconcile what Jaime had said to him about Walder's song. He had tried to talk to the man himself, but he just told him he'd heard the song once and it stuck in his head. This, though, didn't make sense to him. How could he have heard a song written by his father? Where could he have heard it? Jon hadn't bothered to speak to Nan about it. The woman had made it clear how tired she was, and he could speak to her on the morrow. But that still didn't make the questions in his head go away, still didn't resolve the feelings he was dealing with. He got up from his bed and walked over to where he'd hidden the chest and took out the letters and the egg, carrying them back to his bed. As he lay down, he looked over his father's writing, saw how elegant it was, how precisely each word was written. Just glancing at the signature at the end and seeing his father's name written in his own hand made his breath catch in his throat, and so he began to read. The first few were simply asking how his uncle was and whether he needed anything, but after a while the letters started detailing events at the Red Keep and referencing his grandfather's behavior. He closed his eyes in hope that the letters wouldn't detail what kind of things Aerys did, but unfortunately it was not to be. It was references to how Aerys treated his grandmother, though that had Jon sitting up in the bed. It didn't go into detail, but it seemed his grandmother bore the brunt of his grandfather's madness. He would need to speak to Jaime about this, to find out just exactly what his grandfather did to his grandmother, to find out why no one stopped him. After reading a letter which spoke of Aaliyah and the birth of his sister, Jon couldn't help but smile. How his father gushed over Rhaenys, how he pointed out every little thing she did like it was the greatest thing he'd ever witnessed. Placing the letters carefully on the table, he lay back and gripped the egg tightly before falling to sleep and hoping to see his sister when he did so. "You're late," Rhaenys said as she raced towards him. I'm sorry, Rhae, I was reading father's letters. Ye answered, oh well, come quickly, I've something to show you, she said, grabbing his hand. His sister led him across a green field and into a ruined castle. The walls were stained black and crumbled, and the floor was almost melted away. While Yi walked carefully, Rhaenys seemed to just skip from one patch of broken floor to another, and she led him to a large, open space in the middle. Its walls had burned away to nothing, and above him was nothing but sky. Here it seemed the flames had done the most damage. Do you know what happened here, Yi? No. Where are we, Rhae? Summerhall. Rhaenys said sadly, this is where our family almost fell, Yi, but do you know what happened here? They tried to hatch dragon eggs. Yi said, looking around the room. No, Yi, this was where father was born. Rhae said, smiling. As they moved back from the castle and walked up on top of a nearby hill, they looked down while the fires raged, the flames green and terrible in the distance. Rhaenys pointed above to the sky, and Yi watched as a dragon flew in the distance. Its white body was clear against the darkness, and its blue wings were only able to be seen against the light of the moon. He watched as the dragon flew towards the flames, as it slowed and circled before turning back and flying away. Before he had a chance to say anything, he was standing with Rhaenys outside a room in the Red Keep. He could hear pained screams in the distance, and he turned to run towards them, but Rhaenys just smiled and held his hand tighter, and they walked slowly together. It's all right, Yi, a dragon's being born, she said as she led him through the room. He saw a woman laying in the bed holding a babe while a silver-haired man looked on happily. Father, he thought, and felt Rhaenys grip his hand while she pointed at the babe. See ye a dragon? She smiled. He looked closer and could see the purple eyes of the babe, the dark skin. It was her. His sister, and the woman holding her was Elia. He looked to his father, and he could see it the love he had for both, for his wife and child. Rhaenys brought him to the balcony and pointed in the distance, and he watched as the dragon flew closer, its blue wings flapping happily as it landed on the tower in front of them. Its eyes dark and black as it looked down on them both. A dragon knows a dragon, Yi, Rhaenys said, and as he went to answer her, he saw the dark clouds gather, and so he pulled her to him and held her tight against his chest. He saw a small girl with silver hair running through unfamiliar streets as she tried to escape the creatures that followed. He saw a huge dark horse and a woman with wings and the legs of a bird, her dark tail crashing down and almost hitting the girl. He saw a black wingless dragon running towards her while a ferocious stag snuck up on her from behind. He looked on as the girl came up against a wall, and the creatures began to slow before a giant ferocious dog chased them all away. He saw a star fade as it fell to the ground, only for it to rise to the sky and shine even brighter. He saw a beast run from the light, its lion's body and scorpion's tail racing towards the retreating shadows, only for it to be caught up in a net, and for it to struggle to get free. He saw a giant bite the head of a large snake while he crushed smaller ones beneath his feet. He saw a giant gray wolf howl against the moon while around it smaller wolves joined in. He saw a tree in the distance with a large raven sitting on its branches cawing as a white dragon unleashed its flames. He looked on as the dragon flew towards him, getting closer and closer until it landed. Its blue wings lowered and its head faced him, the dragon's purple eyes bidding him forward. A dragon knows a dragon, he heard a woman's voice say loudly, Jaime. He was surprised when Jon knocked on his door early, even more so when he asked for a spar, though they had been remiss on this trip and had done so only sparingly. So he quickly dressed, and he and Jon went out into the cool, crisp morning air, whatever tiredness he had leaving as the chill hit him. The difference between the inside of the keep and outside was stark, he thought as he smirked. The pipes Jon had told him about, which kept the place warm, were much needed. He could tell how agitated Jon was by the way he moved when grabbing their swords. They had progressed to using live steel in their own spars, something that Jon and Laura's had been doing for a while. But when he saw Jon grab the tourney swords, he began to worry, though when Jon nodded, he quickly focused to the spar itself, knowing his king needed to get this part out of his system first. To 5, my lord? Jon asked. I to 5. Jaime smirked. I may actually get one today. Jon japed back and he laughed. Really, I think you're letting your easy victory yesterday cloud your mind, Jon. Jaime said as he chuckled. Ah, but I've at least had some practice, my lord. How long's it been since you last worked out those muscles? Jon said, and Jaime moved forward to swing. It took him a decent amount of time to get the first hit in, and Jon in that time had almost caught him twice. His speed was starting to outmatch even his own, but strength, reach, and experience were still on Jaime's side. While he was also still a fair bit ahead of him on technique, the gap was closing quickly too, Jaime thought as he gained his second hit. The third one he had to admit he got lucky on. They'd been sparring for what felt like an age but was surely not even an hour yet, and Jon moved to catch him on the right. It was only because he slipped as he went to parry that allowed Jon to miss and his own hit to land. Something which even got a smile out of the far too serious Jon in this particular spar. The fourth hit was an incredible riposte, and Jaime doubted he'd ever hit a better one. It seems your luck's not with you again today, Jon. Jaime said, smirking, though in fact he was trying to get Jon to open up. No, my lord, it doesn't, though perhaps yours isn't either. Jon said, aiming 2 quick strikes at him. Since I'm winning 4-0, I beg to differ. Though in my case it is talent, not luck. Jaime said as he feigned a thrust. Oh, I wasn't talking about the spar, my lord. Jon said, smiling as he spun quickly left, then right, and then left again before aiming a swing which Jaime barely parried. So what are you talking about then? Jaime aimed 2 quick thrusts before using a couple of half swings to try and catch Jon out. Oh, I was talking about your betrothed not being here, Jon said, and Jaime took a step back before laughing as he moved forward, deciding he needed to put Jon in his place for his attempted dirty trick. The swords clashed and moved faster and faster now, both of them in full swing. They parried each other's blows as if they were nothing, saw through each other's feints, and dismissed their ripostes. In the end, it was a simple swing which earned Jaime the victory and also Jon his point. As Jon ducked and spun and was hit in the side at the same time as his own blade caught Jaime on his sword arm. Well done, I knew you'd get him, a little voice said, forcing them both to turn around to see who it was. Really, little wolf, shouldn't you be asleep? Jon said as he walked over to his sister. But you were sparring and I wanted to see. The little girl pouted. Oh, she's definitely your sister, all right, Jaime said, and the little girl beamed at him. Why don't you go get properly dressed and we'll go break our fast? All right, but you'll speak to father about the bow, won't you? Arya said, and both Jon and Jaime laughed. I promised, didn't I, little wolf? Jon said, mussing her hair before she ran off. He watched as Jon stared at the little girl as she ran off back towards the keep, her little legs moving swiftly as she dodged the little puddles in her way with ease. She's a wild little thing, isn't she? Jaime said, aye, she's fierce. Jon said, smiling, would you walk with me to the godswood, my lord? Aye, why not? Jon placed the tourney swords back and they headed off towards the godswood, walking in a comfortable silence. He was pleased to see the agitation had been replaced by an almost calmness, and it reminded him why he loved to spar so. As they walked, he could see the keep come to life. There were people starting to move around, guards being changed, and it reminded him that he really needed to talk to Stark today. Jon had been practically unguarded while here. Ghost had been with him, of course, though even the wolf had raced off from time to time and was missing yet again. But Jors and Allers had barely been able to do their job. While there may not be any threats here, it had still made him nervous to leave his king without protection, and it could wait no longer. Unfortunately, given that Jon had told his uncle he knew the truth, Jaime doubted he'd get away with just a conversation about his guards. I wish to speak to you privately, my lord, which is why it's better done here, Jon said as they entered the godswood, obviously taking Jaime's silence for confusion. I know, Jon, I was just thinking of other matters. Really, I only mentioned her once, my lord. Jon japed. No, well, I mean, yes, of course I think of Daisy, but not just now, Jaime said. Are you nervous, my lord, about the wedding, I mean? Jon asked. What? No, I mean, yes, I mean. Gods, no, I'm not about the wedding or the marriage. It's more what it means for us, actually, you and I. I'm supposed to be your Kingsguard, and I know what you said about the vows, Jon, but actually about that I wanted to speak to you on that too, Jon said, stopping him and holding out his hand. Jaime looked down at the object in Jon's hand in shock. He couldn't, not him, someone else surely. Jaime Lannister, I would name you Hand of the King, Jon said as he handed him the golden hand pin. Jon, there's no else, my lord, no one who's done as much for me or whose advice I respect more. You can't be a Kingsguard, my lord, and it has nothing to do with your vows or with Daisy. It's just you're more than that. To me, you're a lot more. I accept, Jaime said, and Jon smiled broadly. We may have to hide the pin for a while longer, though. We've hidden a lot already, that shouldn't be a problem, Jon said, laughing. They reached the heart tree and sat down, and Jaime put the pin in his pocket. Had circumstances been different, he'd have laughed at the irony of a Lannister serving a Targaryen king as Hand once more. But he was not his father, and Jon was as far from Ares as one could be. This time they'd do it right. This time the lion and the dragon would be united in a common goal, one without ambition or madness. I had a dream last night, my lord, a vision. Some parts of it make sense and some not so much, but before I get to that, there's something I need to know. I need you to tell me, my lord, even if you don't wish to. Jon said, Tell you what, my grandmother, what did he do to her? Jon asked, and Jaime gulped. Jon, he took a breath. Are you sure you want to know, my king? Jaime asked. I need to, Jon said determinedly as he stood up. So he told him everything. Of his grandfather's madness, his tortures, his killings, and how fire excited him and what he did to relieve that excitement. He looked on as Jon's hands balled into fists as he paced up and down. He thought about standing up and trying to calm him down, but he waited to allow him do it himself. What of the Kingsguard? Jon asked after a few moments. I asked Sir Jonathan one day, told him that we were sworn to protect your grandmother too. Of course you were, why didn't you? Jon said angrily. He told me we were, but not from him. That when we donned that cloak, we swore to obey. Jaime said. Jon shook his head and continued to pace up and down, his hand clenching and unclenching as he looked from the tree to Jaime and back again, before he knelt before the tree. I swear it here in this sacred place that never again will a queen suffer for the lack of protection. Never again will a king's word be enough to stay the hand of men when he acts a tyrant or seeks to harm those he's sworn to protect. I swear it by the old gods and the new. I swear it by fire and blood, Jon said as he reached his hand out to touch the tree. I told you the oaths were shit, Jon said as turned around and reached over to touch him on the shoulder. You did, Jaime nodded. Tell me about Sandor Clegane, my lord, Jon said, sitting down beside him. Clegane, why? Jaime asked in confusion. He's called the Hound, is he not? Jon, why do you want to know about Clegane? I think I'm supposed to send him to look after my family, Jon said to Jaime's surprise. He proceeded then to tell him of his dreams, tell him of Sir Richard and the plans they'd made, and how the dreams seemed to both involve those plans and offer up some worries about them. Jaime was a little put out by the fact that he'd made some plans with Richard he hadn't told him about, especially those concerning Dorne. But it was the idea of the falling star which hit him even more than the idea of sending Clegane to protect Jon's uncle and aunt, though he spoke of the former first. Clegane's a far better man than people think, Jon. You know my father hired him to be my nephew's sworn shield. No, my lord, I didn't. The moment he learned about my father's death, he walked away, vowing never to serve my house again. Why? Well, my sister is crazy and her son is just as bad. I doubt he likes serving either of them, but with my father alive, well, he'd have bore a grudge. Had he done so with him alive, my father would have had him killed. Can he be trusted, my lord? I believe so, Jon. Do you believe the dreams? I do, Jon nodded. The star, Jon, it's Arthur. I know. I don't know the beast, though, Jaime said, shaking his head. I do, it's Amory Lorch, Jon said. Ned, after breaking his fast, he asked Sansa and Arya to come see him in his solar. Both his girls had been disappointed that Jon hadn't turned up, and Arya especially so. But Ned was more concerned that Jaime Lannister hadn't shown either. The two of them were obviously together as Loras, and the Reeds had come down and neither knew where they had gone. The Tyrell boy had got up to go, find them only for Ghost to arrive and almost force him to stay, which had been a sight to see. He would deal with the boys later once he got the full story of what had occurred out of the way. He had spent last night watching, and though both boys behaved well, he noticed the looks Theon threw Jon's way. Cat too. Though she had made her feelings far more vocal, and yet again he had spent the night alone in his bed. My lord, your daughters are here, Alan said from the door. Good Alan, send them in. His two girls couldn't be more different, and yet both it seemed had taken well to Jon, which made him happy. He had feared with the boy gone for so long that a distance would have grown between them. He had in fact thought that Jon and Robb would easily fall into their old pattern, the two boys having been inseparable once, yet it was the girls it seemed who'd welcomed their brother more eagerly. "Father, you wish to see us," Sansa said politely. "Is this about my bow?" Arya asked hopefully. "Bow, what bow? Jon didn't tell you," Arya said annoyed. "I haven't seen your brother yet." "Oh, he must be getting it for me." "Getting what?" he asked. "My bow." "Oh, all right," he said, not knowing what she meant and figuring it was better to just move along. "I wanted to ask you about what happened yesterday in the yard with Robb and Jon," Ned said, looking at both his daughters. "Jon beat them both," Arya said, smiling. I know, but why were they fighting?" "Because Theon and Robb are stupid," Arya said. "Sansa," he said, looking to his older daughter. "Jon did nothing wrong, father," Sansa said. "I know that, Sansa, but I heard Theon said something to start it, is that right?" "Yeah, he called Sansa a bitch," Arya said angrily. "He what?" "Sansa, is this true?" "It is, father, he called me that word and he moved as if he was coming to me, but Jon, I don't know, only Theon was on the ground and Jon was telling them if they wanted a spar he'd give them one," Sansa said shakily. "Sansa, it's all right, Jon's not in trouble, I just need to know what happened." "What did Robb do when all this was going on?" "Nothing, he just stood there like always," Arya said. "Always? This has happened before." "Yes, father, though sometimes Robb says things too. Yesterday he didn't, though, he just stood there," Sansa said, shaking her head a little more angrily now. "Well then, I'm glad your other brother was there yesterday," Ned said, and both Arya and Sansa smiled. "I am too, father," Sansa said. "All right, thank you, girls. Now I think you have lesson to go to. I shall see you both later." The girls said their goodbyes and left, and Ned reached over and took a mug of water. This was worse than he'd thought. Not only had Robb and Theon behaved how Jon had said, but apparently they'd been doing things like this for some time. He would need to think more on this. Jon was right. If Robb was behaving like this with his sisters, how was he behaving with everyone else? Yes, he'd need to think on this carefully. Sansa. Her lessons were boring. She hated to admit it, but ever since Jon and Loras had arrived, she had been finding herself more and more bored during Septa Mordaine's lessons. Only coming out of that boredom once the Septa inevitably made some disparaging remark about her brother. She smiled as she absent-mindedly played with the wolf pendant he'd given her. Looking over to her sister, she saw she too was paying just as much attention to the Septa. Being called in to see her father this morning had worried her. She knew what it was about, what it could only be about, but she worried how her father would handle it. Would he send Jon away, force him to leave? She hoped not, and so she had resolved to tell her father the whole truth, to speak up for her brother just like he had for her, and she had been relieved when her father had accepted her word. "Lady Sansa, are you not finished?" Septa Mordaine asked. "I am," Sansa said, and placed the embroidery down on the table. She had almost finished Jon's handkerchief and had started to make one for Loras too, but at the moment she was finishing her present for Lord Jaime and Lady Dacey, she hoped they'd like it. The Septa picked it up and smiled at the quality of the work, but then for some reason frowned, perhaps remembering who it was for. Not that Sansa cared, as she was starting to see why her sister had such a problem with Stinky Septa, as she called her, and Sansa had to bite her tongue not to laugh. When they were given leave to go, Arya raced off while Sansa walked in a far more ladylike fashion. She had no real plans for the rest of the day, and hoped Jon and Loras wouldn't be too busy to spend time with her. She set off in the direction of Jon's room, hoping he'd be there, and as she walked she bumped into literally her older brother. "Watch where you're going," Robb said, annoyed. "I'm sorry, Robb." "Sansa." She heard Jon's voice call to her. She looked to Robb, who was scowling at her, and then to Jon, who was waving her towards him with a smile on her face. Moving away, she heard her brother huff in annoyance as he walked off in the opposite direction. It never even entered her mind to wonder what he was doing in this wing of the keep, though given the look Jon was given his retreating form, it may have entered his. "Morning, little sister," Jon said, smiling at her. "Morning, Jon. Is Loras not with you?" "No, I think he's with Lord Jaime, so are you busy?" "No, actually I've nothing to do," she said sadly. Well, how about I teach you to draw like I promised? He said, and she smiled while nodding her head. They walked down the corridor to Jon's room, and she watched as he frowned a little before unlocking it. As they entered, she saw him look around, and he moved a chair for her to sit on while he went to get the parchment. She saw a folded piece of parchment on the table and picked it up. Opening it, she saw a picture of a woman with dark hair and gray eyes. It looked familiar to her somehow, though she couldn't place it. "Jon, who is this?" she said, holding the picture. "Oh, that's our Aunt Lyanna," Jon said. Sansa looked at the picture even closer now. The girl was beautiful, her eyes full of life and her hair tied over her shoulder. It looked almost lifelike, and Sansa tried to reconcile the picture with the statue in the crypt. While there were similarities, there were far more differences. Looking again at the picture, she far preferred this to the stillness and coldness of the statue. Carefully placing the picture down, she noticed more parchment folded, and so she picked them up. There were some more pictures of even younger girls. The first was barely older than Arya. The second, a beautiful girl not much older than Sansa herself, and the last, an even older girl. Though none of these were finished, and it seemed Jon had left room to change the colors. She found herself eager to know who these girls were and just why they were important to her brother. Perhaps they could be friends of hers too. The younger girl may be friends with Arya. "Jon, who are these of?" "Ooh," she asked, handing him the pictures. "Oh, those are just some people I know. This is Joy, though I need her hair to be blonde and her eyes green," he said, holding the picture of the youngest girl. "She's Lord Jaime's cousin. And this is Margaery, Loras' sister," he added, handing her the picture of the slightly older girl, though it's not really finished yet either, he said with a soft smile. She looked at the picture more closely now, seeing the resemblance to Loras even more clearly. She felt so envious of her brother for being friends with these people. Even here in the north, she'd heard tales of the Tyrells. Meeting Loras had been something she enjoyed very much, and looking at the picture of his sister, she could see herself being friends with her if she only had the chance. "Do you know Lady Margaery well?" "Aye, she's one of my closest friends," Jon said, his smile much broader now. "Who is this one?" she asked, holding the last picture and noticing a strange look come over her brother's face before he got to answer, though there was a knock on his door and their father entered. "Jon, I was wondering if we may speak. Sansa, do you mind if Jon comes with me?" "No, father, Jon and I can speak later," Sansa said disappointingly. "Why don't you get more inks and parchments, Sansa, and as soon as I'm finished I'll come see you," Jon said, and she nodded enthusiastically. "All right, father, did you see this?" she said, handing her father the picture of their aunt. "It's Aunt Lyanna, isn't it wonderful?" she said, smiling. Her father just looked at the picture and then at Jon, a sad expression on his face. He smiled sadly and handed Jon back the picture before turning to move to the door. "It's incredible, Sansa, Jon," he said before turning. "I'll see you in the Godswood, Jon." "Aye, Lord Stark. I'll be there in a moment." Jon turned to her and gave her a warm smile before leaning over to place a soft kiss on her forehead. She looked to him and nodded before leaving and heading to the Meister to get more parchment and some colored inks, wanting to do this right. Loras. When he had finished breaking his fast and after Jon's sisters had headed off to their lessons, Loras looked to Ghost, who finally let him up from his seat. Why the wolf had chosen to keep him there, he knew not. He and the Reeds left the hall, and as they were walking from the keep, he saw Lord Jaime walking alone, and so told Mira and Jojen he'd speak to them later, and rushed over to his lord. "Is everything all right, my lord?" he said, looking around for Jon. "Aye, it is, Loras. Jon has some things to take care of, so why don't you come and we'll have a spar? It's been far too long," Jaime said, and Loras nodded eagerly. When Mira saw where they were headed, she and Jojen followed along. No doubt she wished to spar with them too. He wondered briefly how she'd do against Lord Jaime, but then figured he'd likely not spar against her. Entering the sparring yard, he saw both Theon and Robb training hard under the watchful eye of Sir Roderick. So he and Jaime found a slightly more secluded area and quickly began to get ready. Sparring with live steel was a completely different proposition. Firstly, you needed to be padded up, and secondly, the rules and consequences for breaking them were much more serious. But compared to sparring with tourney swords, the improvements made were incredible. His improvement since he came to Casterly Rock was dwarfed in far less time by the improvement made using live steel. He and Jaime sparred for almost an hour and he was practically exhausted by the end while Jaime was barely breathing heavy. He was surprised when Jaime agreed to spar against Mira though. It'll be tourney swords though, Lady Mira. Jaime said, "Of course, my lord, you're not really going to spar against a girl." The snide voice of Theon Greyjoy said, the Master of Arms having obviously been called away. "You should address him as my Lord Greyjoy, or have you learned no manners here in Winterfell?" Loras said angrily. "Oh, I'm sorry, my lord," he mockingly retorted. "To answer your question, yes I am. Though given both your performances yesterday, I find it amusing that either of you would even recognize a spar," Jaime said, and Loras and Jojen laughed. "We've been trained under Sir Roderick, my lord," Robb said dismissively. "Ah, but even a master couldn't train either of you to be adequate," Jaime said, turning as Mira walked towards him carrying a spear. "The bastard got lucky yesterday. Had we have warmed up, we'd have beaten him easily," Robb said, and Loras felt his blood rise before he could say or do anything, though Jaime looked at him and smiled. "Really, so you two think you could beat my other squire then, do you?" Jaime said, and Loras smirked. "Easily, him or the bastard, or even both together," Theon said, and Loras couldn't help but laugh at the smirk on Jaime's face. "Very well then, he'll face you both," Jaime said. "My lord, I think they were talking about facing Jon and Loras together," Mira said sarcastically. "No, Mira, we must make it fair. Jon blindfolded would beat both of them together," Jaime said to laughs as Robb and Theon glared angrily. Loras walked over and grabbed his tourney sword and stood waiting for the two boys to come forward. He heard them laugh as they walked towards him, and out of the corner of his eye he saw Jon walk out of the keep. Both he and Sir Roderick walked over to see what was happening, and he saw his friend move quickly, until Jaime shook his head, making him stop halfway across the yard. Loras nodded to him, and Jon smiled. "What's going on here?" Sir Roderick asked. "It seems your charges wish to be taught another lesson, sir," Jaime said. "What? They insulted my squire yet again and disparaged his skills. Now they wish to face my other squire, so I've evened the odds." "Fine," Sir Roderick said, shaking his head disappointingly, though he quickly looked more annoyed when he saw it was to be Robb and Theon against him. "I thought you said you evened the odds, my lord." "I did," Jaime said, nodding to Loras. Unlike Jon yesterday, the lesson Loras wished to teach them both was to be a far more painful one. They had insulted his king, his friend, and Loras wouldn't stand for it. So the first blow caught Greyjoy on the arm while the second cracked against Robb's knee. Before they had recovered, the third and fourth caught them hard again. This time he'd hit Greyjoy's non-sword hand hard, getting a pained yelp from the boy, while he'd caught Robb on the shoulder. Loras didn't notice when Jon's sisters arrived. He didn't see Arya stand beside Mira looking on excitedly, or the worry on Sansa's face as she walked towards Jon. He was far too busy. For the next 10 minutes he danced past the angry blows Theon and Robb sent his way. He parried a blow from Theon into Robb, getting a grunt from him in return. He caught Robb with a leg sweep which he hit so hard that the boy crashed heavily to the ground. "Jon." He heard Lord Stark's voice, and it almost cost him a hit in the head, but he ducked out of the way at the last moment. He retaliated with two really hard swipes, catching Theon on his arm and in his side, watching on as the boy backed away in pain before turning his attention to Robb. This time he was relentless. As annoying as the Greyjoy was, it was Robb who angered Loras the most. What Jon had said yesterday was still in his mind. "This was your brother, your sister, and you preferred the company of a hostage, preferred to comment and sneer and belittle rather than be what a brother was supposed to be." The blows he aimed were hard, fast, and true, to the arm, the leg, the side, the shoulder, and eventually to the sword hand, knocking the sword to the ground. Theon had backed away so far that he was almost running from the yard, and Loras felt so angered by this that he raised his sword for another hit on Robb, only for Lord Stark to shout across the yard. "Enough, it's over," the Lord said, walking towards them. "As you say, my lord," Loras said, turning to walk away. Why Theon Greyjoy decided to then make a move to attack him he didn't know. Well, he did. The boy was a coward. Why he assumed he'd make it though was beyond him, but he heard the pained scream. Turning, he saw the Greyjoy backing up and crouching in the corner, Ghost approaching him with fangs bared. He gave the boy credit for not soiling himself, though the panicked words coming from him would take time to live down. "Get him away from me, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Please don't let him eat me," the Ironborn said as he cried in the corner. "Jon, control your wolf," Lord Stark said, and Jon just nodded as Ghost walked over to be rubbed gratefully on the head. "Sir Roderick, bring the boys to see Maester Lewin. Lord Tyrell, explain yourself," Lord Stark said angrily. "Perhaps you should ask your son and hostage to explain themselves, Lord Stark." Loras was doing as he was bid by them both. Jaime said, taking his arm and walking away. "You did very well, Loras, very well indeed," Jaime said, laughing when they were out of earshot. Jon, after seeing the humbling Loras gave his brother and Theon, he couldn't remove the grin from his face if he tried. His uncle had still insisted he speak to him, though so Jon had reassured Sansa that everything was all right, and had watched as Loras and Jaime walked off. He nodded to Mira and Jojen to look after his sisters and turned to walk to the Godswood. Seeing Jors and Allers standing just a little bit off, he motioned to them to stay, and he and Ghost walked towards the heart tree where his uncle was waiting. What in the name of the gods was that all about? His uncle said angrily. "I believe Theon and Robb didn't learn anything from yesterday, Lord Stark. Enough with this Lord Stark business. Call me Ned or Uncle when we're alone, Jon." His uncle's voice still raised. "I told you yesterday how Robb behaves as being noticed, Uncle. You had no right, Jon." Ned sighed. "I welcome you bringing it to my attention, but what you said, how you said it, had you been anyone else, I'd have had you removed. I'm Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and you'll respect that." "You're right, Uncle. I was angry. I should have thought more about how I said things, but what I said is the truth and you need to take note of it." "What do you mean?" "Forget about what they said about me, even forget about Sansa for a moment. They just insulted the lord of one of the most important houses in the realm, bad enough to make him wipe the floor with them in a spar. That can't stand, Uncle." I know," Ned said resignedly. "But that's not what we're here to talk about, is it?" "No, Jon, it's not. You can't go for the throne." "Really, I beg to differ, Uncle. Jon, you lost the right. Your family lost the right." "No, my family had the right stolen from us. Or don't you remember the rebellion? What your friend did was a crime, Uncle. What your foster father did was just as bad. Or do you not remember the bodies of my family laid out on the floor of the throne room?" "Jon, Robert won by right of conquest. Then he'll lose by it too," Jon said determinedly. "You would go to war for this," Ned said, shaking his head. "For what? The murder of my family? Is that not what you went to war for, Uncle?" "I cannot support you in this, Jon. I will not go to war again." "You won't have a choice, Uncle. You think Robert will allow you to sit this out? You think should he win he won't remember you didn't support him, or am I wrong? And what you're actually telling me is that it's me you'll not support, not your friend." "I don't want a war, Jon. I never did. Why do you think I didn't push your claim?" "Tell me," Jon said, looking at him. "I lost my father, my sister, my brother. I lost friends and people I've known all my life. The last thing I wanted was another war, so I hid you and claimed you as mine own. My only wish was to keep you safe and well." "You failed, Uncle. I was safe perhaps, but I was never well. I was never well," Jon said as he felt the tears begin to flow. "Jon, No, Uncle, you kept me safe, but what was I? You raised me a bastard when I wasn't one. You allowed me be treated as lesser than, and allowed your wife. Allowed your wife. Jon, it helped sell the lie. Can't you see that it protected you from Robert?" Ned said, looking at him, his own eyes teary too. But who protected me from life, Uncle? Who protected me from that? Not you, and certainly not your wife." "What life had you planned for me if Lord Jaime hadn't taken me away?" "None, is that right? I know about the Night's Watch, Uncle. I know you thought it a noble calling, but have you ever been to the Wall? Have you ever seen the men there, seen the condition? No, you have not, and yet you'd have condemned me there, would you not? You'd have been safe there. Robert wouldn't have been able to touch you. And I wouldn't be able to touch him, or will you lie to me and tell me that swearing away any claim I have wasn't part of your thinking? Robert is king. Jon, he's a good man." Ned said, and Jon laughed loudly. Are you really that blind? Seriously, uncle, are you that far gone that you're blinded to your friend's faults? He lost the woman he loved, Jon, had your mother lived. Gods, you really are clueless, aren't you? My mother never loved him. How many times did she tell you that? How many times did she tell you she'd not marry the man? Yet you were so blinded by him. You wished him to be your brother that much that you ignored your own sister. Jon shouted angrily. Jon, calm down. Gods, it's no wonder Robb is how he is, like father like son. Jon said, and never saw the hand which slapped his face. Jon, don't be, you meant it, at least live with it. Jon said as he spit the blood from his mouth. Now let me enlighten you, uncle, because you clearly need it. My mother hated Robert. Had she lived, she'd have taken her life rather than marry the man. She loved my father and he her, and more importantly, Robert knew this. She told him, and yet he never spoke of that to you, did he? Aye. How did he behave when you were marching to rescue my mother? How many nights did his bed lay empty? How many whores or serving girls did he bed while proclaiming his love for my mother? And where were you while she was being dishonored so? Let me tell you about your friend. As a king he behaves like a child, a petulant child. He drinks, he whores, and he spends coin like it's nothing, all the while the people he claims to serve suffer in hunger and deprivation. He owes Lord Jaime almost 1,000,000 gold dragons, the Tyrells almost half that, and what has he done with that coin? Where has it gone? For the realm is no better off. I was unaware of that, Jon. It's not all you're unaware of, uncle. You were unaware of the truth about my mother. But more than that, you were unaware they'd been plotting to remove my family long before my grandfather's madness. Or did you think it just happened by chance that houses suddenly married each other in quick succession? That you were fostered in the Vale at the same time as Robert? What are you saying? I'm saying that your foster father, your good father, your brother by choice, all of them were plotting way before my mother met my father. They used my parents to take my family down. And because of them, I never knew my brother, my sister, their mother. I never knew my father or mother, and I swear they'll pay for it before I'm done. Jon turned and handed him the letter his mother wrote and watched as he read it once and then twice before he took it back from him. Where did you get that? Ned asked, his voice shaky. It was in my things from my mother. Jon, how do we? Maybe she was wrong. You really can't accept it, can you? Can't accept that you chose wrongly. It doesn't matter. I'm taking my throne back, uncle, and you're either with me or against me. I leave it up to you which, he said as he walked away, leaving his uncle at the tree. Nan. As she watched on, she could see the hurt and pain on both their faces, though it was the pup her heart went out to. He had given her back her boy, and it was to him she owed her allegiance. She waited until he had left the godswood before she approached, and when she did, she motioned to the crypts and bid him to follow. He did so, albeit reluctantly, and she wished she didn't have to do this now. But her time was coming to an end, and she had but one purpose left. Can't we do this later? No, Jon Snow, we cannot. My time is drawing to a close, and you must be shown. Shown what? The truth of things, the face of your foe, your reason for being. She hated it being so vague, but she knew she was not the only one playing this game, and should she play her part badly, then the consequences would be dire indeed. As they passed the statues of his family, she heard him sigh sadly at his mother's, and she once again wished she had more to offer him. Alas, though this was all she had, this and the truth of things, and she would tell him that too. For now, though they moved to the large steel door which hadn't opened in more than 2 centuries. Tugam and Dragon Jamhri Gilta Rognath ar Aghade. Lor Gamid Ian Trail ar and Taub Amuig. Freegrai ar Nadina Gan Amhras. I bring forward the promised, the chosen, the winter dragon. We seek entry to the beyond, answers to the unquestioned. She said in the old tongue as the ruins began to glow. She reached out to the pup and took his hand in hers before cutting it across the palm and drawing the necessary blood. Ignoring his gasp, she placed his palm on the door and watched as it opened. He looked at her with confusion as they walked past the door and down the steps beyond. Down and down they walked. In the darkness, she thought she could hear the flapping of wings, but down here they held no power, and she smiled, free at last. My brother was and is an evil man, Jon Snow, a jealous man whose desire led to his downfall, but not before he committed sins against the gods themselves. Nan said as she saw the light ahead of her. What sins? All of them, but the worst of all was kinslaying. You know what they say about kinslayers. That there's none more cursed, Jon said, and she nodded. Aye, and believe me, my brother is cursed indeed. When they reached the bottom, the cave they found themselves in was lit from an unknown source. Down here they should be devoid of light, and yet it was brighter than if they were standing in the sun. She led him to the walls and showed him the images drawn there, the images of the kings of old, of the first men and the children. She led him by the hand to the images of the children and the White Walkers, the images of the Great Other depicted as nothing more than a storm, to the image of the man wielding a flaming sword and the figure of ice he battled, the image of the white dragon as its flames covered a mountain of ice, while beside it a larger different dragon, this one of bronze, spewed flame on a field full of men with blue eyes. She led him to image of a large white tree, its blood-red leaves falling as a three-eyed raven made a nest, before she led to the last image where a man knelt in a glade of weirwoods, his flaming sword raised high, and behind him a white wolf and a white dragon stood protectively while a bronze one flew overhead. This is your destiny, Jon Snow, this is why I was sent here, she said as she picked up the egg. Its bronze scales glimmering in the light, she looked at him before handing it to him. Why me? You are the prince that was promised, the white wolf, the winter dragon. You shall bring the dawn of a new age, Jon Snow, just as it was foretold, she said as she waved around the room and the light dimmed, revealing even more images. Who are you? My name is Gwenny's Rivers, my mother was Melissa Blackwood, and my brother was known by many names, though Bloodraven is perhaps the best of them. As I told you, Jon Snow, my brother is an evil man and one to be feared. Be wary of the crows, for they see all. But Bloodraven died, everyone knows that. You know nothing, Jon Snow, Nan said, shaking her head. Jojen, he had felt a little alone since they'd arrived at Winterfell, while Mira had spent time with him, and so had Loras and Jon when they could. It was much different than being on the road where they spent all their time together. He found he missed it, missed the talks with Jon, the discussions on dreams and warging. The books were fine and very helpful, but it wasn't the same as talking to someone about things. He understood, though Jon had been incredibly busy since they'd arrived. He had tried to make time for his family, as well as spending a lot of time, it seemed to Jojen, with the old woman and the giant. The giant intrigued him. There was something about the man, and so Jojen had done some digging around, and had found out that up until Jon's visit the man had been called Hodor for the word he kept repeating. Yet now he spoke plainly, elegantly even, and even his eyes and bearing were far different than they had been. Jojen would have left it at that but for the reaction from everyone when the man had sung and something Mira had said to him while they were in Last Hearth. Are you all right, brother? I am. Why do you ask? You seem different. In what way? I don't know. Happier. You seem happier, brother. I am, he said, smiling. Is it because of Jon? I think so. Why? It's just that ever since you met him each day you've been more, I don't know, she sighed. Happy. He japed and she laughed. I happy. I think he changed something. Mira changed something in me. He said, then I should thank him. I like this change, she said, and he laughed with her. She had been right off course. Jon had changed something. His future now seemed a much more palatable one, a much more happy one, and so when the girl in Last Hearth had smiled at him, he had smiled back. When she spoke to him, he spoke back, and over the course of the night the two had become closer. She liked him and he her, and he could see her look to her father and smile occasionally. What that had been about he didn't know, but he knew that he had changed because of Jon, which meant that perhaps Walder had too. So he had taken it upon himself to go speak to the man and see if he would confirm things, which was why he was now standing nervously outside the man's door, his hand poised to knock. In the end it proved unnecessary, though, as the door opened to show the giant figure of the man waiting. Come in, Jojen, Walder said, and Jojen looked at him confused. How do you know my name? I know a lot about you, though you're far different than I remember. You seem lighter somehow, as if a great weight's been removed, Walder said, and Jojen nodded. Aye, it has, Jojen said, and walked in, taking the offered seat. Good, I know what that feels like, Walder said, laughing. I don't understand, Jojen said. Neither do I. All I know for sure is that the White Wolf helped me as he did you. You mean Jon? Aye, though we both know that's not his name. We do, Jojen questioned, not willing to let on. He's the king we follow, Jojen, both of us, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, and this time we get to see him rise. Walder said, smiling. He raced faster than he'd ever run. She was close, he could feel her, and she was in danger. The stag was too big, too powerful, and it wished her harm. He couldn't allow that. He needed to get there first. He needed to save her. In another life, another time, he had been unable to help. He had been too small, too weak, and she had died. But things had changed. This was not then, and he was no longer small or weak. He was strong and he was powerful, and the stag would pay the price this time. He felt the ground shake and could hear the stag's antlers brush against the ground as it got ready to charge. He pushed even harder and saw it in the distance, and with an almighty leap he was upon it. The stag never had a chance. So focused was he on the weak thing in front of him that he had paid no attention to his surrounding, and as his teeth bit deep into its neck, he felt its life force drain from him. He looked to her then, could see the hunger and recognition in her eyes. He moved away to allow her to feed. She needed it. The pup she was carrying needed it, and she looked to him once and he felt it. They were together again, finally, they were a pack once more. Mother. Ghost said silently, though his mother's head turned as if she heard him. Jon. He woke up with sweat running down his back. He could taste the iron in his mouth, which meant that Ghost had fed, which in turn meant his dream was real and that Ghost could be in trouble. So he grabbed the egg and placed it back in its hiding place. He dressed quickly and picking up his sword, he ran out the door. As he raced through the corridors, he saw that people were already up and about, meaning he had slept later than usual. Not that it bothered him, but it made him have to dodge far more people than he would have liked. Jon, where are you going? He heard Arya's voice as he ran past her. I need to go, little wolf, Ghost needs me. He shouted back, not turning as she ran after him. He ran from the keep across the courtyard and towards the stables. He didn't even bother to saddle Winter, just quickly attached her reins and led her out before jumping on her back. In the distance, he saw Jaime and Loras running towards him, Arya with them, and he smiled that she'd worried about him. But he was still far more worried about Ghost, and so he closed his eyes and Winter began to run, passing a clearly annoyed Loras and a disturbed Jaime. He shouted at them. Ghost, the wolves would follow, he shouted as he left through the south gate. Winter was soon in full flow and Jon let her guide him. He pictured where Ghost was, what the surroundings were like, and he hoped she got the message. He felt the wind in his hair blowing it behind him. Whatever remnants of sleep he had still been suffering from were soon forgotten as they entered the wolfswood. He felt branches brush against his chest and sides, some even scratched his face, and yet he never let up, never slowed down. One thought, one sense prevalent in his mind: I must get to him. How long he rode he didn't know, but Winter never faltered, and eventually he came to a small stream and saw the white fur as his wolf drank the cool water. He jumped from his mare and led her to the water, allowing her to quench her own thirst before he walked over to Ghost and reached out his hand only to hear a growl from behind him. Turning, he saw a gray wolf, even larger than Ghost, though clearly it had not been feeding well. He looked into its eyes and reached out his mind. Seeing the door, he knocked. The wolf didn't exactly let him in, nor did she push him away. Instead, it was almost as if she made a compromise with him. She'd listen and follow, but he was not her alpha and never would be. He reached out and touched her, and rubbing her on her neck, he felt her relax. He looked around and saw the stag's carcass and noticed there was still meat on the bones. Walking over, he cut some off with his knife and fed the wolf, and she ate greedily before Ghost came over and licked his hand. Jon, are you there? He heard a voice call out. Jon, it said louder. And the wolf growled. He leaned forward and looked into her eyes, and she calmed somewhat. Over here, come slowly, Jon said, looking at the wolf and nodding. Pretty soon he was joined by Jaime, Loras, Jor's, Allers, and surprisingly enough his uncle, none of whom looked happy. He sighed at the sight of his uncle. He had yet to tell him of his abilities as a warg, and so how he'd explain why he raced from Winterfell just got a lot harder. Are you all right, Jon? Loras asked, and Jon smiled at his friend. I'm fine. Jon, your face, your lip, Loras said, reaching out to touch the cut on his lip. It's nothing, Laura's really, he said, and Laura's nodded. Jon, why did you run off like that? His uncle asked, and he was a little happy to see there was concern in his expression. I felt Ghost was in trouble, Lord Stark. I needed to find him just in case. Felt, how did you know he was in the Wolfswood? His uncle looked at him curiously now. I just did, Lord Stark. It's hard to explain. Whose wolf is that, Jon? Jaime asked, and Jon was glad he was holding back the inevitable and more than justified scolding he was no doubt going to get. I think it's Ghost's mother, my lord. His mother. I think she's about to deliver a litter. We need to take her back with us, Jon said as he reached out to pat the wolf. Jon, we can't. Ghost is one thing, but she's wild, Jon. It's much too dangerous. His uncle said, no, it's not, Lord Stark. She'll be fine. I swear it on the old gods and the new. We can make a space for her in the broken tower and keep her locked up. I'll look after her until she delivers the pups, he said as looked pleadingly at his uncle. Fine, but she and the pups are your responsibility, Jon. I'll be placing guards around the tower and I won't have my children near her, you understand? None of them, Jon. Aye, thanks, my lord. I promise to follow your lead, Jon said and walked over to Winter. He looked at Ghost and his mother and nodded, and after Ghost looked to the other wolf, both began to follow him. He walked out of the Wolfswood, though rather than rode to allow Winter more time to rest. When they made their way outside, he mounted his mare and they slowly began their journey back to Winterfell. Both wolves flanked him as they rode, and when they reached the gates he heard hushed whispers and laughter from the guards and servants. He's got another one, I don't believe it. 2 direwolves, it's a sign from the gods. When they reached the courtyard, Jon dismounted and looked to Jors before asking him to stable Winter for him. He walked across the yard and saw Jojen and Mira with his sisters. When they moved towards him he shook his head. I'll talk to you all in a moment. I need to put her in a safe place, he said as he headed to the broken tower. The tower itself was still unused, and despite the name it actually wouldn't have required a lot to fix it up. He wondered if there was an actual reason why no one had done so, or was it just a matter of coin? Or was it just his uncle had left this as someone else's problem like he had so many others? Not that it mattered for what he needed it for, he thought, as he was joined by Walder, who helped him push open the door. Behind it furniture piled up and Laura's Walder began to move it, the giant figure moving thrice the amount of he and Laura's combined. Eventually they cleared a warm space. Laura's had found an old mattress and some bedding, and they made a comfortable area for the wolf to lay down in, which she did gratefully. Jon rushed off to get some water and found food for her, and when he brought it back and laid it down she licked his hand. Ghost meanwhile stood outside making sure no one entered. After a few moments Jon let his wolf inside and Ghost stood watch while his mother slept. They locked the door and left the 2 wolves alone to rest. Whose wolf is that? Can I have it? Jon heard Arya say as she and Sansa walked towards him. It's Ghost's mother. I don't think she'll allow anyone to have her, Jon said and tried not to laugh at Arya's annoyed look. Is that where you went and what happened to your face, Jon? Sansa asked. I needed to find him. Sorry if I scared you. As for my face, there were some branches. It's nothing. Jon smiled reassuringly at her. Where did Lord Jaime go? He and father walked off towards the keep. Sansa said, so what do you 2 want to do? Laura's here is off to pray, so it's just the 3 of us. Spar. Can we go sit in the glass garden? You could teach me to draw. Draw? That's stupid. Why are you stupid? Arya said, looking at her sister and frowning. Arya, your sister's not stupid. I draw. Wouldn't you like to learn how? You could maybe draw pictures of Ghost or Winter or even what kind of a bow you'd like. Jon said, really? She looked at him curiously. Really, but first you need to say sorry to your sister. Jon said, sorry, Sansa, she said quickly before running off towards the glass gardens. Thank you, Sansa said, and Jon smiled at her before they walked in the same direction as Arya. Laura's heading off in the opposite direction. Jaime. He was torn between speaking with Jon both about his busted lip and him racing off without protection and speaking with Ned Stark about the former. He knew how the lip had happened. Despite what Jon said, he knew something had happened with his uncle, and that Jon had been struck, and Jaime was furious about it. Unfortunately, before he had a chance to discuss it with Jon, the choice of who to speak to was taken out of his hands. Lord Jaime, may we speak in private? Ned Stark said when Jon and Loras went to set the wolves' den up. I, Lord Stark, lead the way. So he had followed the Lord of Winterfell back towards the keep, up the stairs and directly into the man's solar. Taking a seat he waited, and was surprised that Ned sent out for some refreshments, though he was pleased at the mention of warm cider. Nothing was said between the two men for quite a while. When the servant entered carrying the tray, Ned followed her out and spoke to the guards before he came in and sat down. Why did you tell him? Ned asked, looking at him, his face sour and grimacing. It was his right to know, was it not? Jaime said, his own face serious. Aye, but he's too young, he isn't ready to deal with such truths. He isn't, or you aren't. Neither of us are, Ned said, sighing. You're wrong. He's more than ready to deal with them. He needed to deal with them, or would you have him think the worst of himself until it was too late for him to ever let it go? I would have him safe. Ned said angrily. Him or Robert, he retorted. Robert is the king. Jon has no claim on his throne. For him to do so would only lead to war. Then so be it. If it's to be war, then let it be war. Because if that man is left running this kingdom, then it'll fall apart. What do you mean? How much was in the royal treasury when you took the capital, Ned? I can't remember, Ned said evasively. Well, I can. It was full. There was over 2 million gold dragons there, not including the jewelry the royal family owned, none of which I've ever seen since. What's your point? Ned said, shaking his head. My point is that in the 10 years he's been king, your friend has not only managed to empty the treasury, he's also managed to borrow 1 million gold dragons from my father. Not to mention another 600,000 from the Tyrells, and I can bet that's not all he's borrowed. Jaime said, and Ned sighed. Jon said something similar. Of course he did. Did he tell you about the tourney? Aye, a waste of coin. Did he tell you what he did with the coin he won? No. He took the coin Robert wasted and spent it on food for the people of Flea Bottom. Got the Tyrells to do the same. I even gave mine own winnings to it. That's what Jon did. While your friend was feasting and whoring, Jon was helping those who needed it most. I didn't know. Ned said, a small proud smile on his face. Aye, you didn't, so tell me, Lord Stark, which one of them sounds like a true king? Robert won the throne. Jon has no claim. Ned said, shaking his head. Who are you trying to convince, me or yourself? You seem to forget I was there, my lord. I remember it wasn't just right of conquest that Robert claimed the throne by, was it? But that's not the point. It doesn't matter. Oh, I agree with you there. Robert won't give up the throne to a grand council. He'll need to be dragged kicking and screaming from it. So that's your plan, to start a war the realm doesn't need. Why are you so hungry for power, so eager to use a young boy for your own ambitions? Ned said angrily. My ambitions. My ambitions, Jaime said, jumping to his feet. You think I give a damn about my ambitions? I care for what Jon wants, only for what Jon wants. Maybe you should do the same. Jaime said, looking down on him. I do. All I want is what's good for Jon. Then be his uncle, support him, show him you care more about him than you do your friend. I'll not go to war again, Ned said, shaking his head and sighing. War is coming, Lord Stark. Whether you want it or not, and when it comes you may not have a choice. So that's why you're doing what you're doing, trying to gain the North's support without me. Trade deals, a marriage. You think my bannermen will support you even if I won't? Ned said, his voice rising. By the gods, you really are a fool, Stark. You think I'm so manipulative, so clever, that I'm sitting in the background pulling Jon's strings. Gods, how has the North not fallen to pieces with you running it? How dare you? Unlike you Lannisters, we Starks care about more than gold and power. Oh, do you now? What was it Jon said? Oh yes, that's it. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. But you don't see Jon as pack, do you? Certainly not as much as you do your fat friend. Jaime ducked the punch that was aimed for his head and was about to retaliate, but in the end thought better of it. Instead, he looked at Stark, who looked almost shocked by his actions, and shook his head. Just so you know, it was Jon who set up the trade deal with the Manderleys and the Mormonts, as well as the Umbers and Karstarks. It was Jon who came up with the ideas which have benefited the North, not I. This isn't some master plan, Stark. This is a boy who sees wrong and wants to make it right, who sees a chance to help and wants to. If that's not what makes a good king, then I don't know what does. It's too dangerous. Aye, it is, which is why he'll need his uncle's support, Jaime said as he turned to move from the table before quickly turning back towards Ned. Oh, and should you ever raise your hand to my king again, Lord Stark, I promise you'll suffer the appropriate punishment, regardless of being his uncle or not. Jaime said, looking the man in the eye before he turned and walked from the room. Laura's. As he entered the sept, he saw the woman kneeling at the statue of the mother, and almost turned to walk back out. Unfortunately, it was then the septa entered, and before he had a chance to leave, she began to speak to him. Lord Loras, it's good to see you come to renew your faith in the Seven. The septa said, which in turn made the woman pay attention to him. I've always been a loyal follower of the Seven Septa. Yet you spend time with a bastard, he heard Lady Catelyn say as she walked towards him. Jon's birth doesn't define him, my lady, he said politely, though inside he was fuming. He is a bastard born of lust and sin, the septa said. Whose sin, whose lust, not his, for all children are innocent in the eyes of the mother, or does the seven-pointed star lie septa? Loras said and watched as the two women glared at him. Bastards are lustful creatures full of greed and desire. Lady Catelyn said, really, my lady, where does it say that? I've read the good book and I can tell you it's not in there. Loras said, everyone knows this, Lord Loras, perhaps you're just bewitched by the bastard. The septa said, and Loras couldn't help but laugh loudly. Do either of you even listen to yourselves? You both claim to be godly women, yet you insult the mother by blaming a child while saying nothing about the man who committed the sin. Why is that? Is it because he's trueborn? Everyone knows a trueborn is not the same as a bastard. Lady Catelyn snorted. On that we can agree, and when it comes to Jon and those around here, never has a truer word been spoken. Or did you miss him knocking two trueborns on their arses yesterday? Loras said with a smirk. He tricked them, used foul magics as all bastards are wont to do. Lady Catelyn said, and Loras shook his head. You believe just because your son is trueborn it makes him good and true, my lady. Perhaps you should speak to your daughters and see how full of folly that thinking is. Loras said, turning to walk away before he said anything worse. What are you talking about? What have my daughters got to do with things? Why do you think Jon took that spar, my lady? It wasn't because your son and his hostage friend goaded him to. Jon's far better than that. It was because he's a bastard and he wished to harm my son and his friend to show them up, to trick the North into thinking he's capable of rising above his station so he can usurp his betters. Lady Catelyn said, and Loras looked on shocked. Was this woman that deluded? You think Jon wants the North, wants Winterfell by the Seven? Are you serious? Jon would never. Why would he? Because bastards seek what they do not have. They are covetous and never satisfied. The septa said, and Lady Catelyn nodded. I don't know which of you two is more deluded, but Jon doesn't want nor need the North. Given what he's done, he could and will have so much more than that. Loras said, this time storming away. I shall pray for you, Lord Loras, that you may see the light. Lady Catelyn said as he got to the door. Pray for your son, my lady, he needs it more than I. What do you mean? What are you and the bastard planning? Planning? Gods, do you even listen to yourself? That spar yesterday, it happened because that iron-born hostage you all treat like he's a ward called you daughter a bitch, and your son, your precious trueborn son, just stood there. He didn't defend her. He didn't say anything, he just stood there. It was Jon who stood up for her. Jon who defended her honor. Jon who defended her person. He watched as her face dropped and she looked at him, her mouth wide open. He didn't bother to stay any longer though. Turning, he walked out the door. He looked around the yard and couldn't see any sign of Jon or his sisters. Mira and Jojen too were nowhere in sight, though he did find them a few moments later outside the wolf's den. Have you seen Jon? He asked, and Mira pointed to the glass gardens. He walked over and entered to find Jon sitting with his sisters. He had some charcoal in his hand and was speaking to them while drawing something on the parchment. Around him were more unfinished drawings, some good, some terrible, and Loras smiled when they noticed him. So what are we doing? Jon's teaching us to draw, Sansa said happily, and so Loras sat down and joined them. Catelyn. She had tried to pray to each of the seven for guidance, to the warrior to give her son strength, to the father to have Ned come to his senses, to the smith and the crone, the maiden and the mother. She considered walking past the last one, but she felt drawn to it inside, and so she knelt down in front of the stranger. Kneeling down, she felt not 1 ounce of shame as she prayed for the death of a 10-name-day-old boy. She was only doing what was right. She needed to protect her family. It was her duty. Her honor was at stake, and she would do everything to ensure that her children were safe from the bastard's plans. When she was finished, she lit the candles and left, after what the Tyrell boy had said she needed to see Ned. She had realized just how deep the bastard had his hooks in him the moment she saw them together, but to have him disrespect her so, it was far more worrisome than she had imagined. "My lady, I shall pray a little longer if you don't mind," Septa Mordain said, and she smiled at the woman, thankful as always for her support. "No, that's quite all right, Septa," she said, leaving. As she walked past the sparring yard, she was surprised to see it empty. She had thought her son and ward would have been practicing, had hoped she'd have been lucky enough to see them give the bastard the thrashing he deserved. How he had managed to beat them both the day before she couldn't say. She had watched carefully and had seen not tricks, and yet there must have been something she missed. She had planned it out so well, spoken to Theon and her boy and laid out exactly how to deal with him, and yet somehow it had gone horribly wrong. "He's walking around here as if he was the heir, Rob, not you. We can't let that stand." "I know, mother, but he's been trained by the Kingslayer, my lady. What if he's too good?" Theon asked worriedly. "He is a bastard, Theon. You and Rob are true-born sons, heirs to your family's legacies. I've no doubt you can put a bastard in his place," she said determinedly. But she'd been proved wrong, and after he had beaten Theon in the blink of an eye, she looked on worriedly as he faced her son. She had asked Ned to stop it, had pleaded with him. She could see the look in the bastard's eye. It wouldn't be quick with Rob. What if he hurt him? What if he hurt him bad? No, she couldn't allow it. But her husband had been his useless self when it came to the bastard, and he refused to stop the fight, coming up with the excuse that it would look bad if Rob backed down. Better it look bad than her precious boy be hurt, though, and so despite her pleas, her demands, the spar had taken place, and thankfully her prayers had been answered as Rob received no injuries. Still, though, she fumed at how the bastard had humiliated her true-born son, so she had waited until later that night and gone to speak with Rob and Theon again. "I don't understand it, mother. How could he be that much better than I?" Rob said, devastated. "Had you warmed up, my love? Had you gone through the exercises Sir Roderick makes you do?" "No, mother, we saw him and just went for it." Rob said, "That's why, Rob. You remember what you told me about your training, about how good you were getting?" she said, smiling at him. "I do. Yes, you're right, mother, that must have been it. We'll do it again tomorrow, and I'll show Snow who the better swordsman is." But for some reason he wasn't there, nor was Theon anywhere in sight. She called a servant over and asked where her children were, and was disturbed to hear her girls were with the bastard in the glass gardens. Though that paled into insignificance when she heard her boy was hurt. Not caring about how it looked, she lifted her skirts and ran towards the Maester's tower. Mud splattered against her ankles, though she cared not. She needed to be with her boy. He would need his mother. When she reached the tower, she rushed up the stairs to find Jory and Harwin standing guard outside. She pushed past them and almost fainted at the sight of the Maester examining her son. Rob's arms were covered in bruises. His side had a dark red mark that was sure to be paining him. Across from him, Theon sat sullenly. He too was bruised, though not nearly as bad as her son. "Rob, my boy, my poor sweet boy," she said, moving towards him. "Lord Rob will be fine, my lady. Nothing broken or seriously injured, just some bruising," Luwin said, and she glared at him angrily. "Where is the bastard? I want him thrown in the dungeons. How dare he do this to my son?" Catelyn said angrily, while Rob just lowered his head. "My lady, as far as I'm aware, it wasn't Jon they were sparring with," Luwin said. "What, Theon? Rob, what happened?" "It was Tyrell, my lady. We asked for a spar and he went crazy," Theon said, and Cat looked at Rob, who was just sitting there silently. "Right, that's it. I've had enough of the bastard and his friends," she said, storming from the room. She didn't notice Jory look at Harwin and shake his head, as she was far too busy marching towards her husband's solar. When she reached it, she didn't even bother to wait for Alan to open the door. Instead, she brushed past him and saw her husband sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. "I want them gone, Ned, all of them. The bastard, his friend Lannister, all of them gone. They can leave and have their damn wedding somewhere else," she shouted. "What are you talking about, Cat? Are you crazy? We can't not have the wedding. My bannerman would never forgive me. The realm would never forget a snub like that." Ned sighed. "We have to do something. They hurt your son." Cat almost screamed at him. "Rob was beaten in a spar, and given what I've heard about him, he bloody well deserved it," Ned said, and she looked at him in shock. "What? How could you say that about our son?" she said almost tearfully. Our son has been behaving terribly, Cat. Did you know he stood by while Theon insulted Sansa? He just stood there and said nothing while that fucking hostage insulted my daughter. That's what our son did, Cat. Ned said loudly. He wouldn't. There must be some mistake. It's the bastard Ned. He's telling lies about our son. She said. Oh, and is it the bastard making our daughters say the same thing, Cat? No, I've heard enough, and this morning is even more proof. Both of them insulted not only Lord Loras but Lord Jaime too. What are we teaching our son if he's behaving this way? It's lies, Ned. It has to be lies. That's what they do. They lie. They trick you into doing what they want you to do, she said, shaking her head. Family, duty, honor, Cat, that's your house words, not mine. Yours and our son won't stand up for family. And as for doing his duty and behaving honorably, well, it's clear he's not doing that either. If we don't act now, the North will never follow him. Ned said. What are you going to do, Ned? I'm going to punish them both. Robb will be spending a lot more time with me, and as for Theon, gods, if I. From now on, that boy will know his place, I swear it. What are you going to do about the bastard, Ned? She said angrily. What? Jon has done nothing wrong. We should be thanking him. Had this gone on any longer, gods, I fear what that would bring. She looked at her husband incredulously. He couldn't be serious. Her son, her true-born son, was to be punished while the bastard wasn't. She stormed out of the solar and rushed back to her chambers. She needed to think, she needed to fix this, but how? How could she fix this? What could she do? She walked to the wardrobe and reached down to take out the small jewelry box where she kept her letters. Before moving back to the bed and taking out the small pile she had wrapped in a red and blue ribbon. Taking out the last one, she began to read and hoped to find the answers she was seeking somewhere in the words. My dearest Cat, I hope this letter finds you well, though the news I have to share will no doubt cause you concern. I dearly wish it was not so. I wish the news I shared with you would only ever bring you happiness and joy. But alas, that's not the way of life, and so instead I must warn you of the danger you may find yourself and your family in. It has come to my attention that along with the Lannisters, Jon Snow intends to take Winterfell from your son. After he tricked Edmure into a skewed duel, he was heard to brag about bringing the fishes down once and for all. I'm sorry to say he did so with no witnesses, my dearest one. For if he had, I could have brought it to Lord Arryn's attention and stopped him before he could put whatever plans he had into action. He was then heard to brag that soon your son would be reviled in the North, leading to him being declared heir. I do not know what plans he has to dispose of young Brandon, but be wary, Cat, for I'm sure he has some. I will continue to help in any way I can. Ask of me any service you wish, and if it's in my power to provide it, I shall. Be careful, Cat, for I fear that perhaps your husband is not only aware of these plans, but may in some way be behind them. I remain as always your most loyal friend and servant. She placed the letter back with the others and closed the jewelry box. Getting off the bed, she put the box back in the base of the wardrobe and walked to the desk and sat down. Reaching out, she grabbed a piece of parchment and some ink and began to write a letter to her friend. She needed his help more than ever. My dearest Petter Jon. The small cuts and scrapes on his face had caused a little concern, but he had waved them off. The cut lip hurt a little, but once again he waved it off. Though he had at Jaime's request gone to see Luwin to get them looked at, the Maester simply applying some ointment to them, and that was all. He had spent the last couple of days making sure Ghost and his mother were well, which they were, and also alternating his time between his siblings and friends. Young Bran had recovered from a little cold which had kept him away from him, and Jon had tried to spend some time with the boy, playing with his toys and even taking him to see the wolves. He had finally received permission from his uncle to have Arya's bow made, and the look on her face when he gave it to her would be one he'd remember for a long time. Of course, now she had a bow, it created a new problem, training her, something he did his best to find time for. Sansa and he had gotten even closer. His sister had a talent for drawing, and she seemed most eager to explore it once she'd realized it. So they mostly spent their time doing that. He found his sister loved nothing more than to draw pretty things, flowers and sunsets, and when Loras suggested how much she'd love Highgarden, it gave Jon an idea. Though he would need to speak to his uncle, something which had not happened in a number of days, when they did see each other it was polite and brisk, and that was the extent of their interactions. As for Robb and Theon, well apart from the odd glare from Greyjoy, he didn't see much of them. He had heard they'd been punished and was glad to see they were being kept separated for now at least. As he looked at the Maester heading up to the tower, and since for once he wasn't busy, he went back to his room and grabbed the drawings of the wind wheels, the ice house and the ice cart and chest he'd come up with. Locking his room and double-checking it, something he had done ever since he found the scratches on the lock, he headed up the tower to speak to the Maester about some of his ideas. "Maester Luwin, may I come in?" he said, knocking at the open door. "Of course, Jon. Are those the drawings?" Luwin asked, a note of excitement in his voice. "Aye, they are, Maester, the wind wheels and some other ideas," he said, handing the Maester the drawings of the wind wheels. He looked on as Luwin went through each drawing, a small book in his hand as he took some notes before turning back to him. "They are incredible, Jon, the materials, they're just metal and wood, right? Nothing rare or unique." "No, Maester, they're simple enough to make. Once connected, the power is transferred using this," Jon said, pointing to the connections. "What uses have you found for them, Jon?" "We use them to empty the mines at Castamere, Maester, pumping the water out. I heard Lord Tyrion say that some of the keeps in the Westerlands are using them to power the bellows, and one uses them in some way for opening and closing the gates, also as a mill located in the keep itself," Jon said, and Luwin nodded. "And you have no problem if we use them here. Lord Tyrion sells them in the west and beyond, but the north is different, Maester. It's the agreement we have. Should anyone wish to make their own, then we'll share the design. Should they wish to purchase them, we'll sell them at a discount," Jon said, and Luwin smiled. "I have some ideas I'd like to try out, Jon. If I did so and they work, I'd be happy to share them with you and Lord Tyrion later. Perhaps we could even sell those designs together, for the north I mean." "Not for me," Luwin said, laughing. "As you say, Maester." "So what are these?" he asked, looking at the other drawings Jon had. Jon explained the principle of the ice trade to him, how in Castle Black he'd seen the way food was stored, something it seemed Winterfell did too. He showed him the brick design that Castle Black used, and Luwin was stunned. "This is far more elaborate than our own, Jon. You think this holds the cold better?" I do. The wall is far colder than here, Maester. But the stores are even colder than the wall itself. It's like they keep it in for longer." "So you intend to have southern houses build cellars like this?" "Aye, but we need to transport the ice to them, which is where this comes in." Luwin looked over the drawings Jon had made for both the cart and also a smaller chest. He scratched his head as he read the notes Jon had made. "Why the chest, Jon?" "I need to see if it works. Building a cart or fitting out the ships is costly. This I can do myself. Line a chest with the same bricks and see if the ice will hold. Do you want to help me try?" "Aye, very much so." For the next few hours Jon got the materials to make the bricks, sawdust, mud, and together he and Luwin lined a chest before finding some ice to store in it. Lighting the fire, they placed the chest close to it and waited. "Maester, why isn't Wintertown used to its fullest?" Jon asked as he ate his luncheon in the Maester's chambers. "As you know, Jon, during the summer people move away and it's only filled when winter comes. But that's a waste of a town, Maester. How many people would you say live there now?" "About 3,000 or so. And in winter, about 5 to 6 times that." "Winterfell receives taxes on goods sold there, right?" Jon asked, taking a sip of his water. "Aye. So the more people there, the better." "I don't follow, Jon." "Well, if it was built up, if coin was spent to make it a larger, better town, you could bring people in, have trade set up. The more people, the more work you could do, and the more they in Winterfell would benefit." "That's true, Jon, but it would cost a lot of coin to do so, and perhaps those in the north would prefer to stay in their farms during the summer," Luwin said, shaking his head. "Perhaps. Though there are lots of people in the south who'd love the chance at a better life. In Flea Bottom alone there are many who'd love the chance to be somewhere safe. Even if that wasn't something you could do, if you build the place up, if you make it so it's a city, people will come. You should speak to your father on this, Jon." "I don't think he'd listen to me, Maester. You though?" "You want me to suggest this to Lord Stark?" Luwin said, and Jon nodded. "Maester, how much coin do you think it'd cost to rebuild or build more in Wintertown?" "I don't know, Jon. To get started maybe 20,000, to finish perhaps 100,000 gold dragons." "And how much does Winterfell take in taxes from it now?" He watched as the Maester walked to the shelves and took down a book before scribbling some notes. Around 8,000 gold dragons a year, Jon. So given 6 times the numbers, you're looking at almost 50,000 a year, and that's just on those numbers and not including the extra taxes, the building work, and the actual extra trade. Even on the low end it'd pay for itself in 2 years, Meister. Jon said excitedly. It would. I'll need to think on this some more, Jon. Come, let's check the chest. They walked over and opened the chest, and while the ice had melted some, it had held most of its shape, and considering this was right beside the fire and only their first attempt with the chest, both were pleased. Luwin couldn't help but smile at him, and Jon grabbed the drawings and began to scribble some notes. When he was done, he bid the Meister farewell and made his way to the Great Hall, stopping off to drop the drawings at his room. Jaime. They had been here more than a week, and Jaime was bored and annoyed. Stark had barely spoken to him since their encounter in his solar, and despite training every day with Jon and Loras, there really was little to do here. He had gone riding with Jon and Loras the day before, and just being out in the open had made the day go a lot quicker. But it was the nights themselves which seemed far longer for some reason. Both Jon and Loras had japed he was missing his betrothed, and that was definitely true. It would be another couple of weeks before Daisy and her family arrived, and Jaime was at a loss for how he'd spend his time until then. Thankfully, today at least there would be some excitement as some of the northern lords would be arriving. He hadn't been told which ones, only that they would be here soon. So Jon had polished his armor and his cloak had been cleaned. Since it was his wedding they'd be coming for, he'd need to greet them himself. "Are you ready, my lord?" Jon said as he and Loras walked into his room. Any idea who it is? Lords Manderly and Glover, I believe." Jon said. "Glover. My lord Deepwood Mott, they are the Mormont's nearest house. And the lords? Lord Galbart is unmarried, my lord. Lord Robert is his brother and heir. He recently married Lady Cybele Locke, my lord." Jon said, and Loras shook his head. "How did you know all that?" Loras asked. "I read and asked Luwin, as it'd be better for Lord Jaime to know this stuff if he needed it." It would. Lucky for me I have squires to do such things." Jaime japed, getting a laugh from Loras. Once ready, they made their way out to the courtyard to line up and prepare to meet the lords. The Starks were already lined and ready, and Jaime smiled at Jon's sisters, the youngest looking uncomfortable in her dress. He nodded to Ned and gave a small bow to Lady Catelyn, whose forced smile almost made him chuckle. Ever since Loras humbled Robb and the Greyjoy, the lady had been wearing the same look on her face, and Jaime had to admit he enjoyed seeing her struggle to hold her tongue. The two boys in question had been kept apart for the last few days, and the look the Ironborn directed at his two squires would cause him concern had Jaime had not seen him cower from Ghost. As for the White Wolf, he'd been rarely seen, preferring to stay close to his mother, who it seemed was due to birth her litter any day now. Jon and Loras stood either side of him, and as the procession began in front of him, he was glad to see the Manderly sigil flying high. He was even happier to see Sir Wyly's leading them in. "Lord Glover," Jon whispered from beside him as he looked to see two large men leading a covered carriage and then noticed the large sled coming behind it. "My lords, welcome to Winterfell," Stark said as the two Glovers moved towards him, one of them holding the hand of a small, delicate-looking lady who Jaime hadn't seen emerge from the carriage. "Lord Stark," the larger man said before the other introduced his wife, and Jaime looked on surprised as the Lord of White Harbor and his two granddaughters got out of the sled to a chuckle from Loras. "Looks like someone came to dance, Jon," he heard Loras whisper, and he held his grin. "Lord Lannister," the gruff Glover lord said, and Jaime was glad Jon had told him about them. "Lord Galbart, it's an honor," Jaime said, and the man looked surprised before nodding. "Lord Lannister, may I present my wife, Lady Glover," the other man said. "Lord Robert, Lady Cybele, truly a pleasure," he said, and the man wore the same surprised look while the lady smiled. The introductions continued for a while, and Jaime noticed the slightly off way that both Lord Manderly's granddaughters greeted Lord Stark and the Lady Catelyn, though they were slightly friendlier with Robb. Compared to the greetings they gave both girls and then Jon and Loras, though it was noticeable, as was their ignoring of the Greyjoy. When Sir Wylies and Lord Wyman met him, they too were slightly friendlier, though it was when Lord Wyman met Jon that it caused Lady Stark's head to turn. "Jon, my boy, it's so good to see you again. I've been meaning to speak to you for a while," Wyman said, giving him the friendliest greeting anyone had gotten all day. "You too, my lord, it's good to see you," Jon said, smiling, and Jaime noticed Lord Wyman look carefully at him before he looked to Jaime and nodded. He would have wondered what that was all about, but Lord Stark immediately had servants lead people to their quarters, and Lady Stark insisted Robb lead the Manderly girls to theirs. Though both girls insisted Jon and Loras join them, and Jon made sure his sisters came along too, Sansa speaking excitedly to the older Manderly girl. Once the greetings were done, Jaime met up with Sir Wylies and the two men began to catch up. The man japed at his expense before congratulating him on his upcoming wedding and then going to get settled in his room. The rest of the day was again pretty dull, though he did find himself looking forward to the meal that night. While not a feast, it was a larger affair than normal. He had thought either Jon or Loras would come to his room and they'd go together. But for some reason they hadn't. So after waiting for some time, he walked to the hall and walked into a strange atmosphere. Looking around the room, he soon found what the cause was. Sitting at the top table was Lord Stark, Lady Catelyn and the Lords Manderly and Glover. Sitting at the table to the left were the children. Sansa and Arya both had scowls on their faces, as did the Manderly girls, but there was no sign of Jon or Loras. Looking around the room, he found them both sitting at a table at the back of the hall. "What is the meaning of this, Lord Stark?" he said, walking to the high table. "My lord, my squires, why are they placed as they are?" "Lord Loras chose to sit there, my lord," Ned said uncomfortably. "And Jon?" he said questioningly. "My lord, it's not proper for Jon to sit at a higher table given his status." Lady Catelyn said, a half-smile on her face. "Indeed. It's not proper for someone who's done so much for the North to be given a place of honor, is it not?" Jaime said angrily. "My lord, my lady wife only means giving Jon's birth. It wouldn't be proper," Stark said, stumbling through his words. "Ah, my mistake, my lord," Jaime said as he turned and walked to take a seat beside Jon and Loras while the room hushed. "As a knight, I shall take my meals with my squires, my lord, since propriety seems so important to you," Jaime said loudly as Lord Stark glowered at him and then at his wife. "My lord, you shouldn't," Jon said, shaking his head. "No, Jon, they shouldn't," Jaime said, and Loras nodded in agreement. If the atmosphere had been tense beforehand, then compared to after he arrived it had been jovial. As for the meal itself, Jaime, Jon and Loras barely ate, while at the high table the conversation was stilted. Lord Wyman, more than anyone else, was being most silent, though the look of disapproval on his face every time he looked to the Starks was very apparent. When Jaime looked to the children's table, he saw Jon's sisters practically ready to jump and run to their table, but they waited until the meal was finished, and as soon as the tables moved, so did they. They weren't alone either, as both Manderly girls moved too, leaving Robb sitting alone, before he too got up from his seat and walked over towards them. "Is it all right if I join you?" he said, looking to Jon. "Of course it is, brother," Jon said, a soft smile on his face. "Walder, his grandmother was ill and he knew even the Maester couldn't help her, though were you to look at her you would think all was well. She moved just how she always did, but Walder could tell there was more going on with her than usual. Each night when he put her to bed she would kiss his cheek and give him a warm smile. Tonight, though, it was different. Tonight she asked him to fetch Lord Stark for her, and so he did as he was bid. He walked trough the keep, and when he reached the Lord Solar he nodded to Alan, who told the Lord he was here to see him. "Send him in," he heard the voice of Lord Stark say. "Hodor, I'm sorry, Walder, how may I help?" "My lord, my grandmother wishes to see you." "Can it wait, Walder? I'm very busy." "I don't believe so, my lord, I think she's very ill." "Has Luwin seen her?" Lord Stark asked worriedly. "Aye, my lord. But it's you she wishes to speak to." "Very well, I'll join you in a moment." He waited outside, and a few moments later he and Lord Stark headed down to his grandmother's room. He led the lord inside, and he saw the man stumble a little when he saw how tired and old his grandmother was looking. "Walder, fetch the pup, bring him when Lord Stark leaves. Ned, we must speak and speak now," his grandmother said, and Walder went to do as she asked. He found Jon where he'd been for the last 2 nights, in the broken tower with the 2 wolves. It was close, he could feel it. The wolves would soon be born. Jon, my grandmother wishes to see you. I think it's almost her time. Walder said sadly. Are you sure? I think so, he said, and Jon got up from the wolves and patted him on the side. They walked slowly to her room, and Walder felt as frightened as he had been while stuck in that cave. Despite everything he had gone through, it was knowing she was there which always brought him comfort. The idea that she wouldn't be for much longer terrified him. What would he do without her to guide him, to help him? They saw Lord Stark almost race out of the keep, and he looked to Jon, wondering if they should follow, but Jon shook his head, and instead they walked to his grandmother. Come, pup, we must speak, you two, Walder, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Grandmother, he said as the tears began to fall. Be not afraid, for I am not. I go to my mother, to my sister. I go to see my daughter and to see Duncan again. I am happy, content, my boy, but I'm not done just yet. Listen carefully, Jon Snow. The future is unwritten, undetermined, but there are certain things set in stone. One of those is your destiny. Remember what you saw in the caves. Both of them remember and prepare. Beware the crows, Jon Snow, for they are his and he is not on your side. Now I must ask you a favor. For you are the only family we have left. Anything, ask me anything, Jon said, looking to his grandmother. Look after my boy Jon Snow. Take him with you, give him a place, a purpose. Let him be who he was meant to be, who his grandfather was. Give him a cloak of white, put a sword in his hand, and watch him become what he was born to be. I will, I swear it by the old gods and the new, I will, Jon said, and Walder noticed his own tears were falling too. Now go, Jon Snow, the wolves are returning. You will know what to do. Go and leave me, say goodbye, she said, and Jon nodded before standing up and leaning forward to kiss his grandmother's cheek and pat him softly on the shoulder. When he had left, Walder leant forward and embraced her, holding her and feeling her arms wrap around him for perhaps the last time. He sobbed, and she hushed him like she had for many a year. He felt her hand rub his back and felt himself calm down like only she had ever been able to make him. Listen carefully, you must protect him, Walder. From those who would seek him harm, you must protect him, or the world of the living will fall. I will. I'm sorry I kept you here. This was not the life you should have had, but with him you can be who you were meant to be. I love you, remember that always. I have always loved you from your first breath until my last. I love you too. Goodbye, my boy. He heard the whispered words as she closed her eyes. The howling was loud and fierce, and though his heart was breaking, he felt some joy. The wolves had returned.